everybody. Welcome back to the Second Section podcast. I'm your host, Andy Dorsch, and tonight I'm joined by Mr. Mike Ostertag.
How you doing?
I'm good.
Are you having a good week?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, now I am. I wasn't earlier, but this has changed my spirits this evening. Seeing all these friendly faces here on screen tonight.
It's back-to-back weeks.
It's back-to-back weeks too. Yeah, we've upped the cadence, so I figured we'd throw everybody off and do another one back-to-back. So tonight it's going to be a little bit different of a format. This is going to be one of our broken rail episodes, and it is going to be a free-for-all where we invite some of the section crew in to talk about a certain topic. And tonight our topic is going to be model railroad operations. So we've got a awesome cross section of modelers here with different size model railroads and different operation schemes. So it's going to be a great discussion. And before we join the panel here on screen, it looks like we got 27 folks in the chat already. I think this is a record for 2 minutes into the show here tonight. We got 27 people in. So welcome everybody. Rules tonight in the chat are as follows. Keep the nonsense out. I don't want to have to kick you out. And don't be afraid to ask the panel questions tonight. So I'm seeing a bunch of people. Oh, geez, Sue the Milwaukee Road's in here. That's really great. Wigwag Workshop, Mark Stafford from Australia, Adam Cruz is back, and Scott McPherson, Humanity Junction is here. So welcome. But I think without further dilly-dally, we better introduce the panel tonight. Mike, what do you say?
Yeah, probably a good idea.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll put the new guy in the hot seat first. So welcome, Luke. If you wouldn't mind giving us a brief introduction.
Name is Luke Lemmens. Been model railroading ever since I was little. Friends with Tag for a while for work, co-workers. See a little bit about me. I modeled a Sioux line, 1979. Out of high school, I went and got a degree in associate model building. So I do have some type of modeling background. I decided not to use that and got a career with the railroad instead. And just somewhere be 25 years for me now. Got sucked into that. I do operate, and that's why they suckered me into coming in to talk tonight, I guess.
So just for the folks at home there watching along with us tonight, and for all of us who are going to be tuning in on the audio replay, so why don't we talk about your model railroad a little bit? So you model HO scale. You're doing the Sioux line, 1979.
1979, Wisconsin, from Fond du Lac to Stevens Point.
Okay, so how many miles is that?
It's like 90 miles. 90 miles of railroad.
Okay, and then how double deck? Awesome.
Double deck layout, multiple decks. There's a few other hidden layers of staging. Overall room 28 feet by 41 feet. It's kind of a T-shaped front porch insets into the house and the workshop. Kind of tease it off a little bit. CTC main line, all computer controlled. Main line is about 502 feet from the start of CTC to end of CTC.
Okay.
And then there is the whole labyrinth of running through staging and another helix that connects the two endpoints. So it is I can make a big loop for continuous run. Scream when I get around the basement in about 13 minutes. That's screaming.
So from Stevens Point back to Fond du Lac, if you were to take a train and you're hauling, it's going to take you 13 minutes to get from one side to the other.
That's to do the whole loop. I mean, it's a solid 10 to get across. I mean, it's
wow.
I wanted the layout where you felt like you went somewhere, some sense of accomplishment once you got there. I wanted you to come into Fond du Lac Yard when you call the yard yards from outside of Van Dyne. I wanted your guts to kind of churn, to kind of go, oh, this is kind of a big place. I don't know where I'm quite going. I wanted that feeling of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's I look forward to diving into your operation scheme and how the controlled chaos happens when you guys have operating sessions over there. So welcome, Luke. And again, if you guys have any questions, jump them right into the chat and I'll get them up there. Next on our guest list is Thomas Klimoski. Welcome, Tom.
How you doing? Good evening.
Good evening. Would you be so kind as to introduce yourself and your model railroad to the fans out there?
Well, my name is Thomas Klimoski. I'm a retired firefighter, and I'm currently modeling the Georgia Northeastern, which is a short line that runs from Marietta, Georgia, up north, and it ends right on the state line between Tennessee and Georgia. The lower 50, 60 miles of it is freight operations. The upper 13 miles from Blue Ridge over to Copper Hill is on the prototype is a scenic railway, which is the Blue Ridge Scenic Railway, which I was a trainman, got to operate on the ride in the cab and operate on the Blue Ridge Scenic. So that's where I got some of my prototype experience. Definitely nowhere near Luke, and I'm about at the polar opposite of where Luke is with his layout. My layout is in a 9'2" by 10'6" room, and I have a little staging cassette that attaches out in my wife's craft room. I guess I've got about 40 feet of main line, if you want to call it that, but I'm more into the switching operations. And even though I'm in a real small room, if I run three or four switch jobs, which we'll talk about a little bit later here in the operations portion, but I can have a 3.5 hour operating session, which is pretty amazing considering the room is not really that big, but it's always incredible to see how much time it takes just to do the simple switching operations, which is what it takes on the real railroad. It takes a lot of time to pick up and set out a car.
Yeah, it's fantastic to me that for a room size layout, you can get that much, I guess you could say, work done, and have that much fun for 3 hours. So it's going to be interesting to see how your operation scheme compares to Luke's and others for sure. So thanks again, Tom, for coming back. We're going
You're welcome.
to go on to our friend William Sampson. Maybe. Yeah, there you are.
Yeah,
welcome.
Thank you, guys. William Sampson on Sue the Milwaukee Road on YouTube when that's referencing Sue the Milwaukee Road. But I model 1985, and obviously it's the Soo line and Milwaukee Road right at the merger. And I like that time just because it ended up being one of those, you get the best of both worlds. You get a little Soo line, you get a little Milwaukee Road. Milwaukee traditionalists cringe, and then Soo line guys, they also cringe because they're kind of polar opposites in general. But my railroad's in a 10 by 12 room. As far as operations are concerned, we'll kind of dive into that in a little bit, but I like the pace, much like Tom just said. Smaller space, but there's still a lot of stuff to do in a small room. If you want to see anything further on anything I've done, you're familiar with YouTube, just search Sue the Milwaukee Road and you'll find plenty of chitter chatter and content there.
Yeah, that's for sure. And some very, very well produced YouTube videos out there from both Thomas and William documenting their layouts. So welcome, William. I appreciate you being on tonight. And I can't wait for the conversation. So last guest victim on our list, and back from his last tour on the second section here, Tom Jacobs. So welcome back, Tom. Thank you for coming back. I'm glad you got the $20 that I paid you. So why don't you go ahead for those who don't know you, give yourself a little bit of an introduction here.
Sure. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Tom Jacobs. I am currently modeling the Reading Railroad. The Reading's what's known informally as the Cross Line, which is the main east-west route between Allentown, Pennsylvania, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which today is part of Norfolk Southern. I'm modeling the 1973, 1974 era in a 20 by 36 barn that is on my property here at the house in Pennsylvania.
That's outstanding. And then for those who didn't catch Tom's interview with us last time, it was fantastic content that we went through, really detailing his layout from the construction all the way up and just grazing on the operations piece. So if anyone missed that, go back and check it out. It was a fantastic show. I've watched it and listened to it. I'm entertained by it. So I think you guys should all check it out too. That's for sure. So welcome, Tom. And then Mike, I'm going to have you go as well tonight. I want you to introduce your layout for all the fans at home. Just talk about what it is that you're modeling and size and scheme.
Well, my name is Mike Ostertag, a co-host of the show, and I am currently modeling, since that seems to be the appropriate introduction. Everybody used that same phrase. Did you ever notice that? Everybody used the word currently modeling. Yeah, we'll have to play that back later. But currently I'm modeling a shelf layout in S scale. It's 11 inches wide and has it's in my basement, and it's approximately in a room that's 11 by 30. And so I have about, as of right now, I've got right around 35 feet worth of track down, and I've got about double that. So I end up close to 70 feet worth of run or track by the time I get done with it at a shelf layout at 11 inches wide. And so it just goes around the room. Nothing comes out into the walls, out of the walls, like into a peninsula or anything. So it's definitely the polar opposite of all of our panelists. It's definitely a small layout, not only just a different scale, but it's the whole scale of the layout is completely different, which lends itself to some very different operations also. So
that's cool. Very cool. So I'll be interested to hear some of your comments too on, especially with the scale difference potential here, and then just the general size. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mike. And then I'll go ahead and brag about my layout as well. So right now I'm modeling a fictional railroad, my freelance railroad called the Mascoutin Valley. And it's set in northern Wisconsin, and I've actually moved the time period up to the early 2000s. So it's a logging and mining railroad, and it started as an 11 by 16 HO scale layout with the peninsula and around the walls, and it's now sprawled out into the whole basement now. So it's 20 by 40 overall is where the bench work is at right now, and I have about 20 by 20 of the track laid. So it's going to be my lifelong, I guess, project here, but it's going to be interesting because I haven't defined my operating scheme yet on this railroad. So I'll be looking to our panelists tonight to potentially influence me as we talk through tonight's topic. So with that being said, I just wanted to, maybe we'll go around the horn here. So what type of operations are you using? Like car card waybill, time table and train order, just do whatever you want. So why don't we start with let's start with Tom Jacobs. So why don't you tell us about what type of operations you plan to use on your railroad?
Okay, well, I brought props. If that helps. So I'm actually emulating the prototype Reading freight schedule from the era that I'm modeling. So I actually have prototype documentation that I've acquired over the past 25 plus years that lists out the trains, where they originated, their stops along the route, which stations they had work at, as well as the classification of the trains. What was in them. So I'm trying to stick to the prototype as much as possible. A lot, primarily it's east-west through traffic. I mean, the Reading was part of the Alphabet route from the 50s on up. So there's a lot of through bridge traffic that came up through the Hagerstown Gateway from the south, crossed over the Reading, and then went through Allentown, which was the gateway to New York City, and then up to New England through the Maybrook Gateway. Connecting to the New Haven, Boston and Maine, and all that New England stuff. So, some of the famous, through trains like NE84 and NE87 on the West Coast, they ran over the Reading, and those will be represented. Coal traffic on my territory, everybody thinks of the Reading as a coal hauler, and they were. But in the second half of the 20th century, the anthracite business really took a downturn. So there really wasn't much anthracite traffic compared to what there was in the heyday of the Reading. But what there was a lot of bituminous coal traffic that would come up from the Western Maryland, from the B&O, from Appalachia, and that was coming in and going to the Bethlehem area to feed the coke ovens at the big steel mill in Bethlehem. So a lot of and I talked about this in our conversation last week, but a lot of the theme of the layout, if you will, is around feeding Bethlehem Steel, bringing raw materials into Bethlehem Steel, bituminous coal, iron ore, limestone, and then bringing out finished steel goods, I-beams, and what have you. As far as operations, I am installing a signal system, so I am running CTC through JMRI.
Okay.
I am using paper car cards and waybills. So this is the front of each packet of these cards in a binder clip is what goes into a train. So on the front of it is the train symbol, the origin and destination, the schedule, and then what goes in the train. So this is HBX. This is actually an extra unit train, nothing but bituminous coal coming up out of Harrisburg for Bethlehem Steel. On the back of this card is a crew briefing that gives the crew instructions on what they are to do, where the train is staged, what they have to, their instructions on route, where they have to work, and when they need to contact the dispatcher. So this gives them their basic instructions. That's the first card. Second card is the motive power card. I'm trying to get this on the webcam right.
Yeah, you're perfect there.
Yeah, blocking my face, right? This has the DCC address, and then it has the consist information, the road numbers, and the types of locomotives. And on the back of that is a little color-coded destination code listing all of the stations. Not necessarily all the stations, but anywhere that cars could be routed via. So, for example, if something is going to the town of Annville, it's going to be set off in Lebanon and delivered by a local. Now, these color cards are important when we get to the waybill. And what I'm doing here is this is your ordinary baseball card sleeve. Okay,
there you go.
That you would put a baseball card in. And we start off with an empty car card. So this gives you the instructions of what to do when the car is empty. So this is really, this is a Western Maryland 70-ton 3-bay hopper. And wherever it is on the railroad, if it's empty, it should be going west to Rutherford to be handed down to Hagerstown and handed back off to the Western Maryland. So these empty car cards primarily just have the home road routing instructions. There will also be, if you have a car that is an empty that's going somewhere to be loaded, they can also be used for that. So here's an empty car. This is a Reading box car that's going to the Myerstown, the Sterling Drug Plant in Myerstown on the layout. And this is to be loaded with bottles of aspirin to be taken up to CVS Corp, which happens to be my employer in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. This was just me trying to figure out what this would look like. So the crew is going to have to look at the material to see what's in it. So if it's empty for loading, it's going to look like this. And then if it's actually loaded and it's going somewhere, here is the waybill. And this is loosely based off of a Reading prototype waybill. And the way I have these sized is they slide into the envelope in front of the empty car card, so you can still see the number and the reporting marks. That way, this waybill could theoretically be used for any appropriate car. It wouldn't necessarily need to go in front of this Western Maryland hopper. It's generic in that regard. So this shows you where the load's coming from, where it's going. It's going from Farmington, West Virginia to Bethlehem. It's going via Allentown, which is the east end staging on my layout. Bethlehem isn't represented on the layout. Just for some prototype interest, I have the routing instructions, from the Western Maryland to the Reading. On stuff that's coming from several railroads away, you'll see a chain of railroads in here.
Cool.
And this is coming from the Item A mine number 44 that's owned by Bethlehem Mines, which was a division of Bethlehem Steel. And it's going to the Bethlehem Steel Corp in Bethlehem, and it's got 70 tons of bituminous coal. So this is the car card and the waybill that I'm using. And this, rather than having the traditional 4-cycle waybill, where if you're, operating on the same layout over and over again, you're going to see, okay, here comes the flat car with the tractors on it. Time to move that to the team track. It takes more work. It takes a lot more work to set up and a lot more to manipulate during restaging and things like that, at least for some of the trains. Now, for something like this isn't a unit coal train, so it's going to go direct from Rutherford to Allentown, and then it's going to go back empty. It's not going to be touched, So this is basically just take the waybills out, stuff them behind the card, and off you go. Other cars on the layout will take more work, but I personally like the variety and the flexibility and the operational challenge that this will present once we start operating in earnest.
Okay, so I got a couple of questions, Tom. So to run your model railroad, how many prospective operators would you need to have?
I don't know.
How many are you going to try with?
Well, we are actually having a shakedown operating session in a couple weeks on March 20th, and I have I have 11 people that are coming to that session, and we're going to run 2-person crews, one person to be the engineer, the other person to follow along with a notepad and write down all the defects and give me feedbacks and tell me everything I've done, and I should take up golf. But eventually I'm thinking a session will take between 10 to 12 people. Maybe a little less than that, because we'll have, for example, there's some fixed positions. There'll be a dispatcher. There'll be a yard master at Reading. There'll be probably 2 drill crews at Reading Yard. So that's 4. You'll have a dedicated crew at Hershey at the chocolate plant. So that's 5. And then I figure 5 road crews. So 10, 10, 11 guys. We've never had 11 people in the barn at one time. So that in and of itself in a couple weeks is going to be a big test in terms of, how many people can fit comfortably and pass in the aisles and things like that. So this session that we're having in a couple weeks is really going to help inform, the shape that operations ultimately takes.
So here's an interesting question that came from the chat. It says, can JMRI keep the tractors to the team track from reoccurring? So, and that's Tom. That if anyone else wants to take a stab at it too, if they know the question, answer the question, jump right in.
Can I jump in on that?
The tractors, like a load of tractors.
Yeah.
Like a loaded car of tractors going to the
That's
team
what the
track.
question said. Yeah. So you're gonna. The guy producing the show, he let that one through. So.
Oh, we should fire that guy.
We should fire that guy.
Cars rotate and they come back. If you watch them time and time and time again, you will see the same car over and over and over again.
But a lot of times it's almost like a dedicated car, isn't it, Luke?
Western Lime in Green Bay. I don't know how many times I spotted WC82002.
Oh my God. That entire series of cars.
82 for 115. There was just, you see the same cars over
82010
and over again.
Yeah.
So don't be intimidated by the car keeps doing the same thing. I'll admit you might not get tractors every week off the same flat, but you will see visualizing railroading from the inside is definitely differently. Tag and I discuss about this quite often. Insider's point of view versus outsider's point of view. Just because you watch the trains for a little bit, you get a scope of things, but seeing it half your life, go home and sleep and see it the whole rest of your day again, you really get to see some nuances in there that most people don't get to see.
It's like Caramoose Lime and out in at Rockwood, Wisconsin. They've got they just got 5 brand new to them cars, and my conductor and I were like, oh, I wonder if they got a new customer, because these are not cars that are in their rotation. That we know the cars that they always have, and they'll usually tell us, hey, we're swapping out our cars, so we're going to be getting X number of cars, and here's what we're looking to be getting. So then for the next 2 years, those are the cars that are in their constant rotation. It's all you ever see.
Sure.
Now, Sadoff Iron and Metal in Manitowoc, they just purchased 7, I think they are JTMX or JMTX gondolas. That's all they get. They're only using those 7. So we know they have 6 of them on property now. So there's a 7th one out there, and that's what they can fit. They built a stub track inside the plant there to be able to hold these cars. And then they just rotate these cars out on a regular basis. That's all you ever see.
Sure.
So I concur with Luke. I wouldn't really worry about that going too much.
I'll admit you might not see the same tractors on a different flat coming in, or you may. I guess there's a way to mix it up a little bit, but
maybe that's a modeler's thing, and the fact that those tractors are just physically actually the same exact tractors, and that's his question.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what he might have been referring to is there's a piece of JMRI called JMRI Operations that is a tool that will help you do car forwarding and a switch list and things like that.
Right.
I'm not using it. I've seen a lot of traffic on it on the JMRI Yahoo group, but I don't really know the ins or outs. But I think that's what he might be referring to is, can you randomize it sufficiently that you don't have that happen? And the whole thing about the flat car full of tractors, it comes from my experience on Jim Herzog's layout running Gordon Yard, which is where I work a lot. Every other session, this flat car with the 4 John Deere tractors comes in, and we know, it's going on the team track, and it's just the consequence of that 4-cycle waybill system. That's all.
You see that too in real life. You meet a train coming in, and it's like, oh, there's a Wrightstown, there's a car for that place, there's a car for that place. You just look at the trains coming in, and you can just tell where everything is. I mean, you almost don't need a switch list sometimes. Used to be the joke, the cars in the ELS. You throw all the blue box cars to 24 track because that's where the blue box cars go.
The wood went to all the lumber went to Stevens Point.
Yeah, all the
lumber.
It's just you got to know the stuff that there is a lot of repetitiveness in there. So I guess if people are afraid that a 2-cycle or 4-cycle waybill isn't fancy enough, that it's what they do. A lot of cars just bounce back and forth. I'll admit you get, leased rail boxes or leased cars can get a little variety in there, but.
Well, to answer specifically on JMRI, Tom's right. You do have a software program. I use it. That's what I use for my switching. And to answer his question specifically, you can set up how cars come into a yard, and it's first in, first out, or first in, last out. When those cars come in like that, you can basically tell the system, do you want to see that car again right away, or do you want to see that car again later? And the other thing that you can do to be able to stop the same car from showing up at the same facility is set it up so you've got multiple cars that can go into that particular team track or location. So when JMRI looks for a car, it doesn't look for that same type because it may have a short list of cars for you to pick from. Just to give you a little bit more of the mechanical side of the JMRI, that may be able to get a guy down the road a little bit better in terms of the actual functioning of it.
I got a feeling we're going to get way off topic here right now.
That's okay. Great. That's what this show is for. So
all right.
There's just 2 things I want to bring up. Mike Slater did have a question for Tom about his car cards and waybills. Is there a template online that you got those from, or?
No, I made these. I made these up in Microsoft Publisher myself. But okay. Mike, if you wanna PM me, I'd be happy to share them with you.
Okay, perfect. And then just
props?
Yeah, you have props too. I'm going to give props. There was a question from SN2 Modeler. I have that on there. It just says, are all the layout owners using car cards? I think Tom K is ? So
I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. I haven't. I have a couple of theories because my layout is so small. I have a couple of different ideas as to what to do. So we'll get around to that here after a bit.
Okay. Very good. So Tom, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over. Do we have more arguing to do here? Or can we ask maybe Luke or Tom Klimoski what's going on with their operation scheme on their railroad? What do you think?
Let's go to Luke because since Tom breached the car card subject, I know Luke's got car cards and he's the exact opposite than Tom is on those.
Hold on, let me get Luke fired up here on center screen. So the producer's having a rough go of it here tonight. It's gotten out of hand quickly.
And trust me, Luke and I have had many conversations about this.
Complete polar opposite.
It's
all you
so
do is
simple.
confuse people with the more rating that's on there. Where'd the car go? Fond du Lac. That's the west end of the system, east end of the system. When it gets there, what's the yardmaster care about? It goes to the BRC, Belt Railway Chicago. That's all he needs to know. He doesn't care if it's loads or empties. That's it. My car cards, I wanted to experiment with car cards, so I took manila envelopes, chopped them down like 1.5 inches, then 4 inches, and I made my waybills. And this was my experiment like 20 years ago. And the experiment worked so good, I stuck with it. So I made all my car cards. I just use a typewriter to write in the car numbers and letters and the type of car. And I kept it as simple as I possibly could. I also have a 3-hole or a punch up in the corner. So when I do my train list, I have them with a snap ring. So if your clumsy operators drop your whole train, it doesn't fall apart.
As long as
I like that.
That was
Yeah.
That is good.
there
Yeah,
was
that
a-
only works if the snap ring has all the car cards in it, though.
Yeah, there was one model railroad or some guy I thought had that in an issue of something. I think he's using like 3x5 cards, but I thought that's a really good idea.
What didn't Bruce Chubb have that with his Sunset Limited or something? Or what was that? Was that the name of his? Wasn't it Bruce Chubb that had something like that?
There was one, and another thing that I do is because trains you can kind of tell what the train looks like just by if you meet a train on the main line, you can kind of go, oh, that one's kind of going. That's a Duluth train versus a Minneapolis train. You can kind of tell their orientation. So I have blocks of cars that are like Minneapolis bound or Duluth bound. You can kind of tell the traffic. So I have a block that's the head end that makes the train look like the train. And then I have a filler block. A lot of it's like Fond du Lac, Chicago. So all it is just filler bridge traffic. So all my train lengths are like 20 cars long. So I'll take a clump of like to the BRC and the rest of Chicago. And that makes my 20 cars. I may have 3 BRCs or I may have 18 BRCs, but each time I get a 20 car train. That was another idea I got off of someone's layout somewhere else. But
Sure. Yeah, but now to piggyback on this, because I know your system so doggone well, seeing as how, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, now when you get to Fond du Lac and that train is yarded, those BRCs flip back and just become like a west. They could become like a west block,
I
could
trickle my blocks. It's coming back to bite me a little bit now. So what I have is my Fond du Lac endpoints yard is more of a fiddle yard, but it's an active switching fiddle yard. So what the train will actually build up is like if you build up a track of IHBs in a harbor belt and then Chicago's, you fill it out with Chicago's. I'll take that train and the yard is split in 2 leads. So they have a north lead and a south lead, but there's a reverse loop. You'll double your train up and you'll take it around the reverse loop and you'll shove it in the other track. The other yard is just pre-staged trains that are all set to go. So what those IHBs are will be a Nina set out. All the Chicago's is just west bridge traffic. So you'll get a set out on the head end and then just garbage, extra bridge traffic on the hind end. That'll go up to the far endpoint yard and then it flips around again. So what I like the reverse loops for staging, just for the fact that whatever the train picks up en route, those blocks will then get flipped around and be able to set back out on the way back down. My midpoint yard would be Nina. So if I pick up something that's a westbound block, when the train comes back east again, those cars that are Nina type cars are right on the head end of the train, and I can set them back out again.
So Luke, I have a couple of questions. So first and foremost, you're running, is it CTC as well?
CTC, yeah.
Okay, and then you're using the car card and waybills. How many operators do you typically have on your layout at a time?
9's nice, 12. I think I had 18 or 22 in the basement at one time, and nobody was in the crew lounge.
Whoa.
It gets very warm in his basement with that many people. It gets warm as
I tell everybody I model August because I had incandescent bulbs for a while before I went to compact fluorescence and LEDs.
Okay.
A little toasty in the basement.
Toasty.
And then how many trains are on your schedule that you run per session?
There are 5 opposing mainline bridge traffic trains. Now you get to 11 and 12.
You got 6 opposing main lines.
5. I chop it out of there. Yeah, Dave, it is chaos. It is organized chaos. But there's also
4 or 5 locals in there, right?
Yeah, you got the local. You got someone that just handles switches Nina yard, someone that just switches Fond du Lac yard. You also then have locals that are based out of like Wapaka, Nina, Oshkosh. And then you also have way freights that go off system and wave freights that set out along the way. There's a really nice mix of. I'm very happy with the way that the mix. So if someone wants a switch engine to just pound on the lead all day, you can take that job. If someone wants just road train, you can do just that. If you want actually like wave freight work, or there's those positions. So there's a nice mix of everything.
So, yeah, that's a pretty, I guess, that's a lot. That's a lot to handle during an op session.
Yeah.
David Winter. David Winter's comment is hilarious because it's true.
Oops.
Oh yeah, nightmares. There were a bit. I had somebody wanted to dispatch one time. A very good friend, and he sat in the dispatcher's chair for a little bit, and we were like 15 minutes in. I'm like, "How you doing?" I said, "You want to yeah. Like, okay, we'll find somebody else to dispatch tonight.
That's fantastic.
So
So go ahead.
Tag dispatch the last time, and I have a helix that connects the endpoint that has just extra traffic. So if I have,
I still hate you for this, by the way.
yeah, and just any extra overflow. So there's any. We also have a potash grain train. There's several just unit trains I can pump across the system if I want. Last time I had tag dispatching, it was like,
he wanted to.
How's it going out there? And I'm like, do you need any more eastbounds or westbounds? I'm holding up, so I would pump like 2 more westbound than an eastbound at him. And he's like, how you doing? I'm holding up.
Then about an hour later, it was, how's everything going? Shut up and go away before I reach through here and punch you.
So it's if you ever get the chance, it is a fun time to go and operate on Luke's layout. There's Mike stomping around dispatching and threatening people. It's a real good time. Yeah. Everyone has a good time over there at Luke's. So I guess for the novice here on the microphone, what bridge traffic? What does that term mean? What is that jargon?
Anything that doesn't do anything on the layout.
Okay, so that's basically going from staging to staging then.
Pretty much.
Okay.
And that is what a lot of my traffic, a good chunk of my traffic is. I mean, it's the same thing as I model basically the bottom of the funnel. Everything kind of goes Fond du Lac to Chicago would be the first sub. I model the second sub. So you have a branch. It goes from Fond du Lac to Neenah, then you get a branch off the Manitowoc, branch off to Shawano line. Then you go past at Stevens Point. There's past Point, it branches to Duluth, Minneapolis, Ashland, and it just keeps kind of branching off. So I have like the funnel, the bottom of the funnel of the system.
Sure. Okay. Thanks for
I got to throw out just a real quick comment here on this. On the waybills, simplicity versus complex, and this is Tom Jacobs versus Luke. In regards to the prototype modeler and the prototype railroaders, so I got to take Tag, Tom Klimoski, and Luke. You guys are the prototype model railroaders against Andy, myself, and Tom Jacobs being the non-model railroader or the non-prototype guys. When you're looking at a waybill, now, simplicity, I've heard actual railroaders say on a regular basis, I don't care what's in the car. I don't care what the car is. I want the number. I want to know where it's going. That's it. Yep. Now, from an experience standpoint, I'm looking at it from a prototype operator. Now, his waybill is kind of set up in such a way that it shows you kind of the story of the car. Is that story even relevant in terms of you as an operator from the prototype guys? And then now the question, I guess, with Andy, Tom, and I kind of like it. I mean, I think it's kind of neat. It's the experience of the railroad. And Tom Jacobs reference, would you defend yourself a little bit in terms of the waybill? Why waybill and the content? I think it's a fair question. I'm curious to it. I want to know.
To answer part of your question, we don't see the history of the car. We're the end game. Like in Manitowoc, we're the end game. All I know is that car came from Neenah. And if I go into my little handheld computer, I can look up A447's train from 2 days ago and see, that car came out of Kirkyard. Or I could see that, 588's train out of Stevens Point. That car came from here. I don't care about any of that. All I care about is, in 2 days, I'm going to have these cars coming. Sure. So I know that. That's where that ends. When that car shows up in the yard, all I see is we got to go to Rockwood. Oh,
Yeah.
we got it. Oh, hey, look, we don't have anything down the hill. Cool.
Okay.
We're gonna have a decent day. We don't have anything for Brees. We don't have anything for the malt house. We don't, we got to do IP and go do the plastics plant over at Spartek. Those are what we have to do. Cool, not a problem. Oh, look at, they brought 5 Valders over. Period. We stick the Valders on a track and wait for those to bill out. Don't care anything about any of the rest of it. Matter of fact, half the time you don't even look at the car numbers. You just look at them when you need to put them to where they need to go.
Absolutely.
But for the most part, when you're just switching out the yard, all you see is, oh, this is going to track 793 and it's got 02 behind it, which most places it means spot 2, but or it just says 793 with no 0 number behind it. The one that just says 793 stays in the yard. The other one we got to go spot. That's all we care about. That's it. So we don't. The rest of it doesn't factor into it. It's cool information.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying take the time capsule and turn the knob back, because Tom isn't modeling today. Tom's modeling back in time. So Tom, I was just giving him a chance to defend the waybill. That was it.
And I will have my rebuttal.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, Luke is absolutely right, and I can say that with just the smidge of experience, because I've had the opportunity to ride along on some trains with some friends of mine that work for the Reading and Northern, and I think this question illustrates both sides of the coin. There's the people like Luke, Tom K, and Mike who do railroading for a living, and then there's the rest of us who wish we did.
Right, exactly.
But
the whole insider's point of view and outsider's point of view.
Right.
Right.
And to your point, Luke, when I would go along on these rides, basically the job I would ride with them was they would go into Reading Yard, which was NS. They would pick up their train in Reading Yard, bring it out, and they would classify it. Then they would take it up to Reading and Northern, and they'd get the paper that had everything billed and where it's going. They didn't even look at it. They could just tell, okay, we got 5 domestics, we got 3 for international paper, we got 2 for just by looking at the type of car and all of that. So they didn't even bother with the paperwork. They just knew, what they had to take to the scale and weigh, and then off we went. I can understand that, simplicity is some people say it's preferable. Somebody just had the comment about this being kind of paper scenery and, establishing a time and place and giving you a feel for what's going on. It's interesting because, I've also operated on Stephen Mallory's layout, who was a dispatcher for NS for many years, and his waybills and his operating scheme is a lot like yours, Luke, where the waybills are very pared down. They don't have all this, I think my crew brief and my train information is defensible because that tells the crew what they're doing. I'll agree that there's a lot of info on the waybill, but I like it. Now, if I get, and again, the shakedown's coming up. So if the people there say, hey, you got too much crap on your waybill, well, then maybe I'll have to reevaluate. But I think it is I think it's really a matter of personal preference.
Another thing is, William would know it. Joel Weeks' layout, who models the Great Northern 1970, he uses the Shenware software where it's got everything. It's got the pretty picture of the car on top with the whole waybill.
Right.
Gorgeous waybills, all kinds of information. But he also has the color code. And when you're in the heat of battle working a yard, you're looking at oranges, greens. All you're looking at is that the right car? What color am I sorting that to?
And that was the other thing, to your point, that was the other thing I really didn't mention. Here you've
That
got
is
this.
immense with having something like that. If you're gonna, you almost have to have a color code.
Yeah, you've got this color-coded state. I'm getting so backwards here. But you know, in a unit train, it really doesn't matter. But if you've got a train with a bunch of blocks in it, and you bring it into a yard to classify, this is invaluable, because you're right. You know, okay, all my yellows are Allentown, dump them on track 1. My Hershey's are track 3. You know what I mean? Like, you can, you know, you don't. That's where you get to the point where if you're working the yard, you don't care what's in that. You know, you don't care what's in that car right away. All you know is, if you've got a train coming in that takes cars for Allentown, pull as many Allentowns and throw it on there.
Yeah.
You know, so that was one thing I forgot to touch on originally, but that's why I've got the color coding in the train packet, and it goes on the waybill as well.
Yeah. So I'm gonna jump to Tom's defense here. You know, for someone, if I were to go to Tom's layouts, that I guess that little novelty of you know, what was that? What's in the car? Where was it going? Where it came from? Kind of gives me that backstory, you know, to the railroad. And you know what? I'm one of those bad operators that will sit and read every waybill. I am one of those guys. I will hold up a whole system. I'll sit there. I'll get them out. I'll be like, all right. Yeah, we got this. Oh, that's bentonite. That came from South Dakota. Where am I
Andy, but do you
spotting
see
that?
what you've just done there, Andy? You've taken Tom, Andy, and William. You put the 3 of us together, the non-railroad guys, and we're all like, yeah, we like that.
Yeah,
Because
right.
Tom Jacobs just said, though, he said, I do it because I like it. And I think that's really kind of the end game as far as your own railroad. But I saw when you said that you like seeing that story and you're the guy in the yard reading all the information, I saw Tom Klimoski, Luke, and Mike Ostertag all shake their heads because they're like, oh, I gotta wait for the guy that's going to read.
Don't read the things. Where does it go? Get a move on.
Okay, now I've got 2 examples of real life information here. Okay. Number 1, this is from August 14th of 1987. I've actually got like 4 months worth of these things sitting here. I'm going to try to, hopefully, I'm going to shut this light off so it doesn't get washed out. This is from the Escanaba in Lake Superior. This is one of my dad's trains that he brought into Green Bay. And this is a copy of the switch list that they had. And this is all that it is. If you could see that. That's all it is. Car number, content, and where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. So, and that's a real life application. This was handed to the yardmaster in Green Bay. Now this was 1984. I think it was, or it was 87. Now, fast forward 6 years. See, that was August 14th. Here is the paperwork from the very last number 1 to leave Green Bay, Wisconsin on the Green Bay and Western. We have 2 different types of paperwork for the same train. We had a computer-generated manifest, and that manifest looked similar to what you guys are talking about. It has a lot more information on it, but yet, for the most part, none of this means anything. Okay. Except for the car type, the number, and where it's going. That's it.
Oh, I see one says it contains latex. Are you going to be my latex salesman?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, but
That's interesting. Let's read through that now. Let's hold up the show.
But here's another thing that goes along with that. Here's what we got for work. This was the instructions we got for that train leaving Green Bay.
So it's
these are our instructions. This is the work we're supposed to do, and everything is coded by a number, and that number is a milepost because each town was associated with a milepost on the Green Bay and
station
Western.
stop. Yep.
Yeah. So you just went directly. The information, the car that did. There's nothing on here that says, "Hey, this car came from the FRVR via Butler in Chicago via Olwyn, Iowa." Nothing says that. This just says, "Take this to here."
Right.
So, now there's nothing wrong at all with having. And remember, if you guys remember in our pre-show, I told you there was going to be some controversial comment made.
Oh
And
boy.
this sounds like the perfect time to make the very first one.
All aboard.
Oh man.
Since we're on this
Check it
topic
out.
since we're on the topic of simplicity, this and Luke and I have had conversation after conversation, and we are in agreement on this. You do end up with, while planning an operating session, you do have to account for operator competency, because that can play a difference in the success or struggles in a session. You get the wrong people doing a job that they're really not set out for, it can really ball up the works. Luke, we've had this conversation, I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
And it really, it's not to say that the people that aren't exactly as plugged into what needs to be done are bad operators or bad people. They're just really inexperienced, and sometimes a lot of those people just are like, well, I don't care, I'm just here to run a train around. Well, if that's what you want to do, then here's a potash train, go around in circles.
Yeah.
Here's
a sighting. You'll watch 3 of them go by.
Yeah. How come, hey Tig, how come I've been sitting in the siding for the last 45 minutes? I don't know, you figure it out.
Unless they need on your own body.
Yeah. So do you guys feel as if, like with your operators, and Luke, I'm going to leave you out of this one for the time being, and Tom Jacobs, I know you're kind of new to this, so you haven't even breached this yet. But what do you feel? Do you feel about like your car card system may end up having to be a little bit tweaked, because you may find out that, oh man, if I have these guys over, this is going to be way confusing for them.
It may, and I've tried to address that by the information on the crew brief card. I've tried to make it as clear as possible. Contact the dispatcher when you're ready to leave the staging yard. Proceed on signal indication. Contact the dispatcher when you're ready to leave Reading. Proceed on signal indication. Turn the track power off when you get into staging. I've tried to break it down into manageable steps. Now, these are all through trains. I haven't even started doing anything for the locals. There's going to be a number of locals running back and forth, and those may run with a switch list. So although I haven't, really started operating on my layout, I've done a lot of operating on other layouts in the area, and I can, I've dispatched a good number of times, and I can agree with you that, there are situations where if somebody doesn't have the skills or the experience to run a particular job, it really can gum up the works. I've had situations where somebody was on a coal job, and they just made an absolute mess and had both mains fouled on a double track on a double track railroad, and with in a big coal yard. They had both mains fouled. They had traffic stocked up in both directions. I'm sitting in the hole in front of the control panel, trying not to not to erupt like Vesuvius, but yeah, you have to consider when you're assigning jobs. I think you have to consider somebody's experience level, somebody's competence level, and to a point, what they want to do.
Right.
Some people there's people that just want to run a helper job. They just want to shove trains up the hill.
Right.
They love doing that. There's other people that just want to run a yard drill. There's as you were saying earlier, Luke, I mean, there's, you try to find a place for everybody. But I think if you're on a crew, on a regular crew that operates somewhere regularly, I think part of what comes with that is you're an actor in a play. You're part of a cast, and you may not necessarily, it may not be your favorite role, but you're not there just for you. You're there to make the layout run and simulate the thing that it was designed to do. So you have to fit in and do what it is that you're asked to do, whether it's your favorite thing or not.
One thing that I've found in watching other people do some of this stuff is, do you have a copy machine at your work? Do you ever have people that aren't familiar with that copy machine try to make a copy, and to watch those people struggle with the copy machine? And it's like, I'll make the copy for you. Sometimes
making copies.
It's painful, yes.
70s.
Sometimes it's like, okay, everybody can run a copy machine. Sometimes they're just not as inept to working. Once they get familiar with the copy machine, I'm sure they're very good at it. But it's like, sometimes it can just get.
Well, then, Luke, as layout owners, you take us around the horn. Go from you up to Tom Klimoski, then Mike, Andy, and Tom Jacobs. Give me one sentence that you say to that guy that raises his hand for your hot job.
I can answer that one.
Fire away. I want to hear it. What is a way to broach the subject with somebody that takes the grenade job? If they're in the bottleneck and they're like, I want the bottleneck, and you're like, you've never ran this before, and they say, I'm all in. What do you say to them? Give me one sentence from each of you guys, starting with Luke.
Luke's first comment is, tags are already on it.
there is a select few jobs on my layout that it's like, I just need them done. And a lot of times tag just gets volunteered.
I get the crap. I get crapped on all the time.
He gets a lot. Just because the fact that, this local has to get the stuff done to make sure this way freight can come pick it up.
Absolutely.
If I have operator B on this job struggling back there, that just kind of dominoes everything. If I could just get tag on there to just get her done, it's ready and the session can keep moving.
And he never asks. He never asks. He just goes,
tag, you're going to go
tag.
do that.
He just goes, tag.
So then, Mike, in that application, Mike, are you sitting there knowing that you're going to get that quote unquote crap job, or are you taking the job and then having to get moved over there to take care of a fire that started?
I walk down the basement, I turn the corner, Luke is standing there staring at me. I grab a throttle, I go right to Wapaka, and I start doing the work. I don't even talk anymore.
Okay.
I just go and do
your
it.
Job.
Because
you've operated there how many times though, Mike? I mean,
right.
Quite a few,
And
right?
that's part of it. That's part of it. But plus I also worked the job in real life a handful of times. So that also has something to do with it too.
Flows that if you don't do them right, that local out of Neenah, that 3031 job, someone else was running it when I had some friends over there today. And it's like, dude, you could have approached this a lot more fluidly. I wish I had time to qualify everybody in every job, but sometimes you just have to throw them to the wolves out there.
And once in a while, guys will come back and say, hey, what are you doing? How are you doing that? Why'd you put that there? Why'd you do that? And those are guys, I have no problems with somebody coming and asking questions while I'm doing it, because that's how they're going to learn.
Yeah.
And so the more people that learn how to do these things, the less I got to do it.
Right. I was going to say, do you coach people up?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Well, Tom Klimoski had some people come in. I don't know if you've heard this story before, but you had people from Germany that showed up, and you guys didn't speak the same language.
Yeah. Yes. Well, my layout's a little different. It's the we'll call it the final mile railroading. There's micro operations and macro operations. I'm into micro. I'm into the last few miles where that car is delivered to the industry. So I have a completely different operating, we'll say, setup in that it's a lot more relaxed. There's no rush. There's no through trains. You don't have to be done by a certain time. I kind of look at the operating sessions as training sessions. I'm there to kind of guide them. I give them a little bit of instruction and then turn them loose and let them figure it out. And that's part of the fun, is letting them, that aha moment. Oh yeah, that's how it works. Okay, yeah, I got it. And if they get stuck, I'll give them a hand. But it's a lot more relaxed. That's the kind of railroading that I like, and that's what the prototype is. There's no through trains, there's no hot freights or anything like that. It's all just the final mile where the car only comes in through CSX in Marietta, so there's only one interchange spot, and then all those cars are going up the line to different industries. And that's the way my layout is set up. I set it up just like the prototype, and I have the same jobs that they do on the prototype. And you're talking about
Sure, so
finding people that are appropriate for the job. I belong to a club, and that is very true. There are certain jobs that you don't want inexperienced operators in. Primarily, those are the yard jobs, because that's where things start and end. And as an example, we had a previous operating session, and I worked with a guy in the yard, and it was kind of my fault, because I was giving him instructions of what to do, and he was running the switch engine. Well, the next operating session, he took over the whole yard, so he was running the switches and trying to figure out the switching moves. Didn't do so well, because he wasn't putting the steps together. I should have been explaining why we were building the trains we were building, and it's a lot more complicated. The other point I wanted to make out is also, you have different operations for different size layouts. I don't use car cards and waybills. I have switch lists, but it's a lot easier for me to make a switch list when I only have 10 cars being picked up or set out on a switch job. If I had hundreds of cars to do, I don't know that I'd be able to do hand or the switch list like I do. Our club uses JMRI, and we make switch lists. I looked at the list today for car spots. There's between 150 and 200 cars are being moved during an operating session. So I got some paper that we could show if we have time for JMRI, but I use switch lists, and for me it works. They're similar to the prototype, and we can talk about that in a few minutes, but that was pretty much the answer to your question, William.
Well, that was so you covered a couple of the questions that I wanted to ask too. Was so do you use switch list? What's the main I guess method for your operations? And then the other piece of it, while I got you on, Tom, and it's kind of your mic here. So typically you said that you can have an operating session last for over 2-3 hours. And how many people do you pack into your room typically?
Okay, well, let me share this. This is my track plan if you're not familiar with it. Again, 9'2" by 10'6", and then a little staging area outside the room. There's 4 jobs that I do on this layout, and we run them in sequence. Now, I can run 2 jobs at the same time. I primarily like to run with a 2-person crew, one being the engineer and the other person being the conductor, just like they do on the prototype. The engineer operates using the proto throttle, so they can concentrate on running the locomotive like a real engineer would, ringing the bell, blowing the horn for the crossings, and all that other stuff. The conductor is giving the engineer commands: pull ahead 2 cars, back up, etc. So the different switch jobs that I have is, the first job is the what they call the North Local, which works the yard and then comes out and works Marietta up to Dow Chemical. The break point for the local is right here at the Etowah River. Basically, you'll stop right about here. You won't go over this grade crossing. So that's one job, and there's a block sheet, and you get the block. So you have the complete block. You're allowed to go forward, backwards. It's your block until you release it to someone else. So that's a control system. There's no signals on the Georgia Northeastern. There's no signals on my layout. So it makes it a lot easier to build the layout. I don't have to run miles of wires for signals. The next job is an interchange train, basically, that starts off in Tate and then works its way, picks up cars out of the yard and runs down to staging, sets them out in staging, and returns with another set of cars and sets them out in the yard. That's exactly what happens on the prototype. The only difference is from Tate down to Marietta is about 50 miles. On my layout, it's quite a bit shorter, but it's the same job, same idea. And the reason behind that is in Tate, they'll hold the cars in Tate that go down to the industries in Marble Hill, which is the third job. And a couple of times a day, maybe once a day, depending on what they need done down in Marble Hill, they'll take the cars from the yard, they'll take the empties down, they bring them down, they set them out at the industries here in Marble Hill, and then take the loads, which comes out of Emery's and Georgia Marble, back up to the yard. When they gather up enough cars to make a run down to Marietta for the interchange, they do that typically about 3 times a week. On my layout for the operating session, I do it every operating session. So that's the second job. And like I said, the third one where you come down and you work the yard. Now, the fourth job is a new one that I added, which is universal alloy. This is a removable industry that goes across the doorway to my layout room. So this section is not in place unless the industry is scheduled to be switched. And what they do on the prototype, it's a unique industry in that universal alloy ships out aircraft components, which we figured out were floor sections for aircraft and they're shipped out to, I believe, Seattle or something like that. They're shipped on flat cars, but they overhang the ends of the flat car by about 2 feet on each end on the prototype. Now they're shipped on 89-foot flat cars. I use the shorter flat cars for my layout. But for that one car that they have to pick up, they have to bring 2 idler cars plus an empty to replace it with. So you're bringing 3 cars to switch 1. So what we'll do is we come out of the yard with your 3 cars. You have to come in, pick up the 1 car, get your idler cars on each end of it, and then spot up the new empty flat car. And then you're going to do a shove move back to the yard, which in this case is just a very short move, but I'm going to use a caboose as a shoving platform, which is what the plan was on Georgia Northeastern until they had something else come up and they couldn't use the caboose anymore. But it's a neat job and it's unique. It takes a little bit of time. You have to do a little bit of switching to get the cars in the right order. So those 4 jobs, I ran just working this one job. You start off in the yard, you sort your cars, and then you switch these I believe it's like 6 industries. Not every industry is switched every operating session. It's based on the frequency of car movements that I've seen from the prototype. Pretty much Georgia Metal Coaters, which is this industry here, and Dow Chemical get switched every session. The other industries could be hit or miss. They may get, skip an operating session or 2 with no cars being picked up or set out at these other industries. Just working this one job the other day took 1 hour and 20 minutes, just switching just this section of the layout. Then the other job here, from here down to the staging cassette, that's about a 30-45 minute job, depending on how many cars you got to sort in the yard. And when you sort them, you're sorting them into certain tracks based on where they're going. Working the Marble Hill job is another 45 minute, could be even longer because you've got limited runaround track here to work your industries. That's another and then this final job here could be about 30 minutes. So if you add them all up, and basically I run them in sequence. So you work from one job to the next job to the next job. We could stop at any time. We can stop in the middle of the session. It doesn't really matter. The cars are set up so that they work in sequence. And like I said, I had one time where one crew was working this north local, the other crew was working from here down to Marble Hill. They didn't interfere with each other because they were on different aisles and there's no interference. So one crew was working here, the other crew was working here.
Sure. So I got a question about your for your job where you need the idler car. Do you have documentation that kind of helps the operator along, or is it you're kind of there to coach them along to do that job? So do they pull a card out and say, okay, I'm doing this job, I'm gonna need something to perform that action?
Okay, here is the switch list. Well, we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but here's my switch list, which is made up on an Excel spreadsheet. So all this I've just typed up based on the prototype. I was able to get some prototype forms because I work for the Georgia Northeastern. Again, that's not something that's available to the general public. But I also coincidentally met the gentleman that makes up the prototype forms. That's his job, and he goes all over the country doing it. He came and operated on my layout. So I mean, that's how cool is that to have the guy that's developed these switch lists for all over the country? He came and gave me some ideas on the switch list. Here's your instructions. This train requires a caboose as a shoving platform, and it explains pretty much idler cars are required on each end. So it's under this, we'll call it special instructions. And then this is the way the switch list is set up. It tells you that these cars are in Elizabeth Yard, track 2. These are the cars. They're being blocked to UAC, which is Universal Alloy Corporation. It's telling you these 2 cars are going to be specified as the idler, and here's your caboose, and then this is the empty. When you get down to Universal Alloy, this is telling you what's at the industry. Here's the car. It's telling you it's going to CSX Elizabeth. It needs idlers. There's a star here on the HW column, which is high and wide or excess, and it tells you what the commodity is, which is parts. And then there's some, we'll call it scenic typography down here at the bottom. You don't really need to know any of that, but it just looks prototypical. And then down here, for those people on the prototype, they don't tell you what the things mean under the columns, but I put them down here: L, E, H and W, hazardous, etc. And then for the car types, it's just very simple: B for boxcar, C for covered hopper. These are the very, very simple ones. Starting up here at the top, we'll just kind of go through this real quick. I have copies of these switch lists on my website. You can go to www.thomasklimoski.com, go to the operations tab, and I actually have downloadable copies of this. If you have Excel, then you can go in and just change it, do whatever you want to with it. You're welcome to use these. I have copies of all my forms and prototype information on there, and the forms that I use. So this is the work list for the North Local. This is the yard report. So this is telling you what you're going to do in the yard before you leave. It's telling you all the cars in the yard. Here's the Elizabeth Yard main track, track 1, track 2, and the world famous bank track, which is next to the embankment. That's exactly what they have on the prototype. So that's why I call it the bank track. And what you're looking for here is you're looking for cars. If it says Elizabeth Yard and you're in Elizabeth Yard, that means it stays there. If it tells you that it's going to Capital Materials or Georgia Metal Coaters or Argos or any place that's not Elizabeth Yard, those are the cars that you're going to pull and put into your consist. The other thing that people nowadays need to know, besides what's the car number and where it's going, is this column right here, the 8Z, hazardous. That means that it may need some idler cars or may need some spacer cars or something like that because it's a hazmat. So that's when you say, I only want to know 2 things about the car, there's an asterisk next to that saying, well, if it's a hazardous materials car, there's some things you can't do with it. So you need to not have it next to the engine. You need to have this, you need to have, and there's exceptions to that. If you're working the yard, you can do certain things. So these 2 cars down here are going to Dow Chemical. One of them is an acid car. The other one is a non-hazardous car. Just because it's a tank car doesn't mean that it's hazardous. So you go down the list and you look and see. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cars that are coming out of the yard. And then you come down here, and then this is the cars. Once you pulled them, you may or may not have them in this order. So here are your 6 cars that's in your, we'll call it wheel report. So this is your North Local train. So these are the cars that you're leaving the yard with. And then the industries are listed from, in my case, south to north. So the first industry that you come to is Georgia Metal Coaters. These are all the cars that are at Georgia Metal Coaters. If it says CSX Elizabeth, that means you're picking those cars up and you're taking them back to CSX Elizabeth. If it says Georgia Metal Coaters and it's at Georgia Metal Coaters, it's telling you that's a hold. That car has not been emptied yet, so it still needs to be unloaded. And depending on where it's spotted, you may need to put that one into the next unloading spot, in this case at Georgia Metal Coaters. That's going to be the oldest car, so they want that one first in so that they can unload it because they're paying for it. Next one down is a team track. It says team track, so that car doesn't go anywhere. Next one here, you've got Argos. You got 1 car listed at Argos, 1 car goes to CSX Elizabeth, so we're pulling 1. We're going to look up here and see if we got any going to Argos. Yep, we got 2 cars going to Argos, so those 2 get set out. We picking up 1, and we just keep working our way down the list. Capital Building Materials, we've got 1 car going to CSX Elizabeth over here at Dow Chemical. And these are spot specific at Dow Chemical. So if you look up here on the list of where the cars are going, here's Dow going to spot 1. The other car is going to Dow spot 2. So you have to know which cars are going into what spot. And then that pretty much is that's the switch list for that one job. Here's the next job, which is working the yard and pulling cars from Tate and taking them down to Elizabeth. So it's got all your yard information, and then you come down here and you look at what you're picking up at CSX Elizabeth, and it's telling you where they're going once they get up to Tate. They're kind of blocked for those industries. Although they're not being delivered to the industries, they're just going to Tate and it tells you what track they're being set out on. This is the little model railroady part so that we know what track it goes on. And then here's the third job here. And these are all just pretty much the same setup. And then we already covered the last one, which is the, and what I do to make these lists is I've got it all formatted. What I'll do is go in and overtype the list with a new car number. So I can control who's picking up what, where it's going, how many cars, because I've got limited sightings. I've got limited runaround spots and things like that. So, I just like to have a little bit better control. Now you can use JMRI. I've worked with that a little bit, and I've run into some frustrations with it because it wants to force cars to certain places. So it's a programming thing with JMRI, but it doesn't, one of the things that when we talk about operations, it doesn't have to be complicated. You can use handwritten switch lists. You can make it real simple. You don't have to make it super complicated. And if you're not into operations, start off slow. I saw a couple of people, how do you start off if you got a small switching layout? Well, just start off real simply. Okay, we're gonna pick up a couple of cars. We're gonna set out a couple of cars. I'm gonna pick 3 or 4 cars, and we're gonna figure out where they go. And then start learning how to do your switch moves. Which way, as an example, I had an operating session on my old layout in Miami, and I had a guest come over, and he was working a job. He couldn't figure out how to use a runaround track to get to the other end to do a facing point, a trailing point, and stuff. He was completely frustrated. Fantastic modeler, but not a great operator. So he just didn't get the operation. So start off slow, start off working, doing some informal switching. Sometimes I'll come down here and I'll run my layout and I'll just say, I just want to switch a couple of cars. So I'll just switch a few. I don't have to worry about, oh my God, I'm going to have to reset this thing. Some layouts, they don't touch the layout in between operating sessions, because if you move cars, that screws everything up for the whole next operating session. So it works on a smaller layout. That's not going to necessarily work on a larger layout. When you're building a larger layout, you need to consider that. You need to consider the jobs that the crews are going to have to do. What's your pool of operators? How well are your operators trained, or are you going to train them? Again, I look at it when guys come over, I take them as they've never operated before. They don't know anything, and they just want to go and have a good time and switch a few cars. And there's no stress. There's no yelling. There's no, angry people. I've seen guys in yards that are so stressed out. I mean, what fun is that? That's no fun. If the guys are screaming at each other and stuff, that's, to me, that's not fun. One of the other things is I'm on the wrong way. A sheet here on your railroad for visitors. You know where the team track is, but do they know where the team track is? Have a diagram there that shows people where things are. And I've got a little sheet that shows you that, and so I give it to people at the beginning of the operation, just so they can kind of orient themselves. A little bit of a list or rules that I like to see. They're, as I said before, they're guidelines, not rules. Nobody gets punished. Nobody gets sent to the corner. Nothing, no timeouts, none of that stuff. Just, if you don't do it, okay, but I'd like you to operate this way. The biggest rule is just slow down, enjoy the operations, have fun.
Sure.
That's it.
So going back to William's question here and the around the horn. So we were gonna go and talk about it was how do we have that conversation, right, of putting that person on that job, right? That's what we were talking about.
Yeah, kind of just what is a one-line phrase or just a very summarized response to a guy that he volunteers for the job that you say probably shouldn't jump on it. What's a way of approaching that?
Well, I think you had asked earlier about do you coach people? Do you coach people up?
Right.
And that's I think that's really the essence of it. I know when I first started learning to operate, that's how I was introduced to it. I went to an operating session on Jim Herzog's layout, and I essentially followed a guy around for the first half of the session on a couple trains and watched what was done, learned how to read the cards and the instructions and how to, work the radio, did that for a couple trains. And then the third time it was all right, off you go, and you learn and you make mistakes and that's how you learn. So, after running road crew for a while, I had an interest in learning how to work at the yards, and so what Jim does, and actually he's really good at this, is he'll have somebody post at a particular position with an experienced operator for a session or two. So they basically can watch and observe throughout the course of an entire session. Okay, here's what you do in this yard. Here's the list of inbound and outbound trains. Here are the things. And then they do that for a couple sessions, and then he'll give them a crack at it. Same with dispatching.
Right.
And what he does, and I think this is the other thing that comes into play as layout owners, when you have a big layout where it's a number of crews and things like that, Jim, as the layout owner, and I myself will probably end up doing this eventually, is he basically floats. He's got the title of superintendent, so he floats around the whole layout during a session. He's checking on people. I see Mike shaking his head. He's checking on people and seeing how things are going. Does anybody need any help? If something, if there's a mystery short somewhere or something like that, he'll go see what's going on. He's kind of the roving troubleshooter. And that helps the newer guys, So Mike, all right, go ahead. Tell me what I'm doing wrong.
No, you're not doing anything wrong. It's all about Luke. It's all about Luke. The hey, how's it going, Tag? Great, go grab this train. Here, let me go see if so-and-so is available. And off he goes to see if somebody else other than him will run his own layout. Because Luke never runs his layout.
My ultimate goal is to sit in the crew lounge and do nothing. I would like the layout to run itself. That usually never happens. I never get a chance to run my own layout just because you're always roving and being the troubleshooter. I think there should be some chain of command with a large layout that problems shouldn't get to me. That's always one of my theories. I mean, it should be ask another crew member, ask a yard master, ask a dispatcher. It shouldn't hopefully get to me, but that's never seems to happen.
Yeah, because I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head though, Tom, is the fact that I think most larger layout operators are going to end up wanting to kind of see the fruit of their labors, how it kind of works out, and I think I can see you doing that with your layout big time, just kind of sitting back, kind of kicking back and enjoying watching what goes on, because you actually, if you stop and think about it, as the layout owner, you get to rail fan your own layout while it's being operated.
That's true.
Which
it is neat to watch the monster in motion.
Yeah, it is. It is very cool to see that. And William, I know we haven't gotten to you with your operating stuff yet, but why don't you kind of take us through what you're doing and then answer your own question?
Oh,
yeah. Stop stirring the pot and tell us about you.
Yeah, tell us about you, and then answer your own question. How would you handle one of those new guys that says, "Hey, I want to go do the Hiawatha district and I want to do this," and you're like, "Gah."
Well, it's kind of I mean, I think Tom Jacobs, you really kind of keyed in on basically coaching up a person or coaching somebody up to get better at something. I'm in the process of trying to vet out. I am using JMRI switch list, but I'm trying to vet out how well does the system work, because as in the comments these guys are noting, it is kind of frustrating because you can't force a car what you want it to do. The Queso Cowboy says, "Hey, I want this car to go to this place," and Tom's got it going where he wants it to go because he can do it. He can control it with his waybills. Vetting that process out really comes down to showing other operators, "Hey, this is what I'm doing." So as an example, I did take a PDF of my switch list. I sent it to Tom Klimoski. He actually mentally walked through switching my railroad from Georgia and then gave me some basic notes back to say, "Hey, this is what works and this is what doesn't." That's coaching me up as an owner, saying these are the things that you could do to improve it. Now, I would say, to answer my own question on what would you say to somebody that jumps into the grenade position, I would just say, are you really good at trying to untangle knots or, unclog the bottleneck? Because that job, I know on my dad's railroad, Union Yard is a juggernaut. It is basically, if anybody botches up Union Yard, you've botched up the railroad, much like you've got, Luke, on your railroad. When that happens, I'm just being honest with them. And if somebody raises their hand for it, I just say, it is a tough job to take. I would probably, pick something else to start out with. And if you want to learn to do union, as Tom said, coach it with a guy. Take an experienced operator that's ran union and let that guy do it a couple times and learn it through. But now, Tom, I guess we might be shifting gears a little bit here, but going over to Tom Klimoski, what is your thought process when taking a switch list and then looking at somebody's railroad and saying, this is what works, this is what doesn't, and then providing that feedback? Because I found it extremely valuable when you give basically an assessment on how a guy goes into operations and is trying to figure this system out.
Well, it comes down, I've operated under a lot of different systems. Our club layout uses timetable and train order. There's another layout that I operate on that uses car tags, the tags on cars or car tags, car cards and waybills, switch lists. So I've kind of experienced them all. What I do is I try to just put myself in the role of the operator and say, okay, this is the paperwork that you've given me. Can I figure out what you want me to do? And so I looked at your switch list and I started counting up cars, and I realized that there was 16 cars and you only had 14 cars being set out in different industries. So, okay, what happened to those 2 cars? Why am I missing 2 cars? Well, they were cars that were respots within the yard. And then I start working my way down the list. How am I going to switch this layout, or how am I going to switch if I was working as a crew? I'm starting at the yard and I'm going to work my way down the line. I'm figuring out which way the railroad orients itself to the yard, just like the real railroaders do. You're going to start off at yard A and you're working your way to yard Z or to whatever end point. What's the first industry I'm going to come to? Is it a facing point or a trailing point? How am I going to get the cars to that? Where am I going to put those cars in my train? I want to group those cars together. When I go to work the yard, they're scattered all over the place. They may not be all blocked together. So now I've got to gather my cars together, put them in the right order. Do I want them at the head of the train? Do I want them at the end of the train or in the middle? And then throw in some hazmats in there, and just in case I got to deal with those. I don't want those next to the caboose. And there was a comment about, if you model certain time periods, yeah, you don't have to worry about it. Well, there was some requirements way back in the day when the steam engines were running, and they didn't want explosive cars any closer than X number of cars from the locomotive. You can imagine a sender going into a wooden boxcar that's filled with explosives and what would happen. So there was hazmat cars even way back in the early 1900s. It's just the rules and regulations weren't the same as they are now. There's a lot more rules and regulations as to where the cars have to be placed and stuff. So anyway, continuing. So then I worked the industries, figuring out where I would go, where I would make my runaround move, and then where I'm going to take those cars back to the yard. So that's kind of the sequence that I go through. And when I'm working a yard at somebody else's layout or on the club layout, I'm kind of thinking in the same way. And that's kind of what happened to the guy that filled in for me when I was working a different job. He didn't get that. I didn't explain to him the sequence of events, and you've got to kind of plan ahead. I'm not thinking 1 move ahead. I'm thinking 5 moves ahead. Where do I want to be? Kind of like, if you think about it, it's like playing chess. You're not just moving the pawn or the rook or this or that or wherever, because there's a consequence to moving that guy. And you may find out when you're in checkmate that you made some bad moves. So same thing happens on the real railroad. You want to start thinking about where your cars are going to be. Tom Holly's listening. One of the things that he did on the prototype, he's a prototype engineer, now retired. But when they were working the yard, they were going to do a shove move. After they switched the last industry, they're going to do a long shove move back to the yard. Well, you had to have somebody with point protection. So he's riding that car. Well, what car would you rather ride for 3 miles? The side of a box car or the end of a platform car, like a tank car or something like that? So they would plan that so that car was going to be point on the way back. That car may not have even been set out at one of the industry spots. They just took an extra car from the yard, knowing that they were bringing it back to the yard. That car never really moved, but they were using it for point protection. So those are all the little things that you think about when you're switching and trying to work your way through it. And that doesn't come from the first time you do a job. These professional railroaders, they do this day in, day out for years and years and years, and they know all the moves. When you go to somebody's layout, like if I went to Tom's layout, I don't know which way north is, where is such and such town in relationship to this other town. I've operated on some large layouts. I have no idea where these things are. Well, the layout owner knows where it is because he's built the thing. He knows, I don't know, all the parts of the country. So it's important to kind of, lay things out so that the operators can come in, figure out what they're doing, where they're going, and a little job aid. On my old layout, I had what Tom had, a job aid. It says, pick up your locomotive at this place, switch this yard, pick up your cars in this yard, go north, which is this way, out of the yard, switch these industries, return. And it was like a little cheat sheet or script so they knew what they were doing for that job. That's not prototypical, but the real crews knew what the job was. We need to tell somebody that's never come into your layout how to do the job. So that's something that I think about when I try to work like your layout, William, or some of these other layouts. I'll go through and just kind of mentally, what's the job? Where am I starting? Where am I going to end up? And try to figure out the moves.
One of the things is you got to remember too is the fact that even in real life, everybody was new at one point.
Yep.
So if you approach operating from that standpoint as an experienced operator, and you get a guy that is just like pie in the sky lost, and it just does not get it, and it happens. It absolutely happens. And even as an experienced operator, you get thrown a curveball that you didn't exactly expect, and you're like, wait a minute, this isn't right. This doesn't, okay, wait. And then you got to start cycling through all of the knowledge that you have to try to sort, like you said, William, untie that knot. You have to untie that knot in order to make everything pretty again. And even as an experienced operator, that can take a few minutes. But if you've got a new guy, you were new once too. And there's always been all this talk about guys barking at other people for not knowing what they're doing, and barking at this guy and screaming on and getting on the new guys for not knowing what's going on. And all that does is, all these that does. And at one time, self-admitting here, at one time I was one of these guys that was like, it absolutely has to be like this, and don't give me somebody new because I don't want to take the time to deal with this guy, and this, I don't want to be in the way, and this needs to be done, and this needs to be done. And now it's kind of like, okay, yeah, come on over here. Look, I think there's a certain maturity that comes with operating too, that the longer in the tooth we get, the more knowledge we've acquired, the more we're willing to pass that knowledge on to the people that don't have that knowledge and help them, because that's going to do nothing but make guys like Tom and William and Luke, your larger layouts and stuff like that, give you a bigger pool of qualified people to be able to draw from. So that way you're not always using the same 8-10 guys all the time. That way it doesn't become this little, hey, I can't get into Tom Jacobs' place because he's always got the same 10 guys there. It's, you got a pool of guys. And not only does that also will make each session different. So it's not like it's not like a broken record every time. Every session will become its own little world. So, unexpected things will just, I think you got to draw, you have to approach it like that. Like, take anybody you can under their wing, and just remember you were new at one point too.
Yeah, it's a great point, Mike. And I think, we all have an obligation to pay it forward, right? If we want to, getting into the bigger picture of things, if we want the hobby to continue and thrive and prosper, then, we have kind of that moral obligation to show people how to do things, or help people that are struggling. And Tom Holly had a great comment a few seconds ago about show them, tell them, make them do it. That's actually the exact same advice that my a former boss of mine gave me when I was a new manager, and I was, struggling with, how do I, teach my people to do what they have to do. He said it's very simple: show them what you want done, tell them how to do it, make them do it, watch them do it, and rinse and repeat.
Yo, absolutely. And there's a question out there that Weston Overlord put up. Does all of this only
Overland.
apply to or Overland? Yeah, Overlord. Does all of this only apply to giant railroads? Absolutely not.
Nope.
My railroad, I'm believe it or not, one of the plans that I have set in place for my layout is that I plan on using a dice for part of my layout. And matter of fact, that die is going to tell me how many cars are coming onto the system. So because I've only got like 4 industries on it, and my largest train is only going to be 5 or 6 cars at the most. So I'll use a die and say, oh, it's a 3. Okay, well, great. I'm going to grab into this box of car cards or car numbers that I have. Here are the 3 cars that I'm going to use. And that's going to be that's one idea I've had of coming up and doing that. So then when somebody would come over to my layout and say, well, what do I do? Well, you grab the engine and we're going to start working our way to the interchange. And then we're going to come back to the interchange or back from the interchange and put the power away. And our day is going to be done. But walk everybody through everything, and it won't take and take the time to explain things. So that way, like Luke was saying, after a little bit, I'm not going to have to worry about, I can have Tom and William and Andy and maybe Luke over to the house and have you guys just run the layout and be great. I won't have to worry about doing anything.
But that's the thing, I think, even too, on the small side. So railroad wise, the question, even talking about large railroad versus small railroads, Tom, Klimoski, myself, and Andy, you kind of fall into it. Well, you too, Mike, into the smaller railroad size. And it's the intimidation level that can be had of going into a larger railroad like Luke's or like Tom Jacobs. You guys have intimidation only because of the mass and size and how much is going on. And I think that's where, for my rewinding back to when I first started into operations, Gary Friesman, a local operator here, invited me over, and I considered that in my mind, I built up, this was the mecca of railroads to go operate, because this is where all these other guys that were talking about operating were going. And when you got there, you got into a position, you're kind of like, well, you're going to get a job and you're kind of nervous. You don't want to botch things up. They're like, where's the Spooner turn? They're not on the main. Come on, let's get going. And I'm sitting there shuffling, trying to find my way through the weeds. But when it really comes down to it, vetting yourself out and letting yourself, basically be vulnerable in positions where you're intimidated. And at the same time, I think when it comes down to, like Mike, adding the little element of dice, I mean, that's a different take on how you want to handle your railroad.
Right.
And everybody's got the rules. I always say this is like a board game. Tom Jacobs has his, Luke, Tom, Mike, Andy, we all have our board games. These are our rules. These are our cards. This is how we're going to play this game. Are you in or are you out? I mean, hopefully you don't roll snake eyes, but at the end of the day, you're hoping.
Yeah, you roll boxcars.
You're hoping that you can end up in a position that you're having a good time. And that's really the bottom line.
Right.
I mean, how you get there, to Weston's question, how you get there, it's not about the size of the railroad. It's about how much fun you can have, operating it.
Yeah.
And I know Andy,
fun, it's no good.
No, absolutely not. And it took me a long time to disseminate work from pleasure to a certain degree in the hobby, because I would always want to bring, well, I had a crap day at work. Oh, I got to go over to Luke's house. All right, fine. I'm going to go over to Luke's house. And then I'm already bad mood from having to be at work. Now I just got done with 12 hours of work, and I'm going to go over to Luke's house for another 3 hours. Now I walk in and I'm already crabby. And then he wants to throw me in the, and after a while, I just started to realize I can't be like that, because there's other people that are going to be looking to me for help and other things and having questions. And I know not as much but I've been there pretty much since day one of Luke's layout. And there's a lot of questions that, like Luke said, it should never get to him.
Mhm.
You know, and the same like with Tom. I'm sure that, you know, Val and James and those guys, you guys, hopefully when you have an operating session and they're there, they'll be able to help take some of that pressure off of you, because they're just as knowledgeable about your layout as anybody else, as you are.
Yep.
You know, and Tom, the same goes with us. How do you handle that? Do you well, you only have a handful of guys though, right? And William, same with you. How do you handle it at your dad's place?
Just in terms of just handling the number of guys.
Yeah, like with guys that are asking questions. Do they?
I end up being the troubleshooter because I'm the one that's familiar with the system. So anything that goes down, everybody points to me. And my dad, he has the ability to log into locomotives and stuff, but even he will turn and say, you know, fix this. And if you're trying to operate, and I think Tom Jacobs, you touched on this about being able to sit back and try to just watch the railroad run, or even, you know, let things kind of unfold. But when issues surface, you just jump on them and you try to put them out as fast as you can. But at the same time, I think, Tag, when you talk about being frazzled or frustrated or having a mood coming into it, one of our most recent ones that we actually did on my dad's railroad, just a short summary, is JMRI crashed the night before. So I had nothing. I didn't know where any cars were. And everybody's just, you know, this is how it's going to happen. Haha. That's what you get for a digital system. Car cards don't do that. And when it is all said and done, we're able to kind of get through it. The crew that we had was experienced enough. But when it is all said and done, those things that do happen is just basically saying, listen, this is what happened. You guys want to still run? And everybody in the room said, yes, we still want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So William, I had the last operating session I attended at Robert Welke's Wisconsin and Upper Michigan freelance railroad. JMRI went out. And it was, hey, do you guys still want to do this? And we're all standing in his basement. And I was a first-time operator there. And I'm like, heck yes, I want to do this. Let's go. And he's like, all right, we're doing it the old-fashioned way. You know, call into the dispatch and we'll get you out and moving. And that was, I mean,
sometimes that's more fun.
I've done JMRI. I've done call in the dispatch. You know, the old mother, may I, can I get out on the main? And as a first timer at his layout, I had a great time, and I did not take the most complicated job. I knew going into that, I'm like, I am not taking your main yard right now, because I know that I'm going to destroy this operating section if I do that. You know, there was, and he has a neat setup. How he set it up was everyone draws a number out of the hat, and then you get to pick your job. Well, I drew a number, and they're like, okay, I said, I want to do this job. And then they said, okay, we're going to, so Andy, you're pretty inexperienced on this layout. We're going to put you with an experienced operator. And I got to meet a new person. I got to, basically this guy named Mark, he operated with me. It was fantastic. We talked like we were old friends, and, it was a really positive experience. And, but it was interesting that when JMRI went down, we all sat there and said, yeah, we're here to run trains. So, get her done. So, yeah.
Well, I think collectively too, you guys across the board, do you not, when you as an operator, not as a layout owner, as an operator, go into railroads wanting to try, I like to go back to railroads and try different jobs every time, not the same one, but different jobs every time. Do you see your operators doing the same thing, or you as an operator wanting to explore and try, different jobs?
Oh, absolutely. I know when I go over to Joel Weeks's house, I know where he's going to want me to be. But as a rule, I try to kind of mix it up. I've worked Union Yard over there already. I've worked, I believe he's got the St. Croix job, Luke? Is that what it is? The one St. Cloud. I've worked the St. Cloud job. I've worked, a couple of road trains. But I'm still not familiar enough with how his stuff is done to where I actually am 100% comfortable, and I've been there dozens of times.
Now, Mike, does Joel Weeks, he does the Great Northern Wilmer sub, correct?
Yes, I believe 1970 or 69.
Yeah, I think 69. He's not BN yet.
Yeah.
So and I'll say this, kind of getting back to William's comment about intimidation. Joel Weeks, when I first got back into model railroading, aside from operating at my local club, Joel Weeks was like the first road game I had, and it was like, you go into that stadium, you're coming down the tunnel into the basement, and all of a sudden you're just like, oh my God, it's a double decker, there's trains everywhere, you hear the hum of the DCC system, and it's just like, you're there at Madison Square Garden going up against, the Knicks that night. And it's, that was that kind of feeling, that little bit of intimidation. I'm just like, all right, Andy, what job do you want? I'll just take a road train or something, whatever you got laying around, you don't even know what to do or say.
Oh, Doris, your pants are on backwards.
Yeah. Jeez, how'd that happen? Get your finger out of your nose and all that good stuff. I mean, seriously, I feel you that intimidation factor is certainly a real thing for, I guess, the less experienced operators. And I'll throw my name in that, in that ring. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
it's
up
one
to
of
the layout owner to make the new people feel comfortable. Introduce the rest of the crew, and like you said, if you can have them cub with somebody like they do on the prototype, have them follow somebody around. That's one of the other things is like with you, Mike. If what happens if you don't show up at an operating session on Luke's layout? Now who's running?
It's a party.
Job? Now
everybody's happy.
Yeah, everybody's happy. Well, but those are the things. What happens is sometimes these layout owners get so locked in with one person who's got to work that job. What happens if that guy's out of town or sick or whatever? Now we just can't run the layout unless Mike's there. I mean, you want to have somebody there to kind of step in and fill in, or a relief person to fill in if the main guys are out, or somebody that can rotate through different positions. It's nice to have that designated hitter every once in a while.
Right.
Come in and hit in place of somebody else that can't be there, and that gives that person a chance to learn a new job and come with somebody so that you can kind of learn all the different jobs. I like moving around to different jobs on layouts.
Yeah, sometimes you just don't want to think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sometimes being brain dead at a operating session and just taking that potash train that goes from point A to point B is one of the most relaxing things you can possibly do, because all you're doing is following the pretty colors and going from one yard to the next. And there is absolutely no thought process at all in it. And you can enjoy operating and running that train because you don't have pressure. You're just going from end to end. And even as an experienced operator, you don't always want to dive into the, into the mouth of the dragon, so to speak. You don't always want to be that, right there. Sometimes it's okay to just let it fly on by and just kind of wave and say, bye, buddy.
Well, and that's that's sometimes it's the luck of the draw, though, because I know, a lot of the layouts that I run on, they just run in sequence. So the first 5 or 6 trains, let's say, however many road crews there are, those will be assigned initially. So if you're on a road crew, going in, okay, you're going to run JN5 as your first train. And then when you've completed that run, you go over to the board, and whatever is the next train on the call sheet, you mark up for that. So you could run 3 or 4 trains in a session, but you don't necessarily know what you're going to get, and I think you can engineer that a little bit as a layout owner, depending on how you set up your operations, that people have a chance of getting a mix of jobs, that you're not just doing that engage the flywheel in the brain, run the through train back and forth. Maybe you have a way freight that does a fair amount of switching as your first train. Now your next one is just a through shot that goes from one end of the layout to the other. So it's just, you get a break, you come back, your third one maybe is a mix of the two. It's all you want to try to have I think some people, you can't always get what you want, right? But you can
get what you need.
You get what you need.
Right.
Luke, do you happen to have the list? Do you happen to have your list handy?
I was
Your
going to show. I was trying
your
to figure
schedule?
out screen sharing here. If I
Hit
Yeah,
share.
Well,
just,
while Luke looks for that, Tom, I want to ask you the question on redundancy. Do you find any time when you operate redundancy of going to something and you feel like you're just going through the motions? Do you ever feel that way?
Me?
Well, you or even just your operators, if they feel like there's this schedule that you're going to say it's these 6 trains, it's going to be the same repetitive motion. Do you develop a redundancy that starts to feel like a wavelength that it's kind of like we go through these motions every time? It's always going to be the same, dog and pony show. Do you see what I'm saying or what I'm asking?
Yeah, no, and that is, that is a trap that can happen. And I know, I think part of that is it's your job as the layout owner to keep updating your operations. The more you learn about the prototype, and I know I keep bringing up Jim Herzog a lot, but his layout is the one on which I operate the most, and he is always tweaking his schedule based on as he gets more prototype information about the trains that actually ran, how they ran. He's always tweaking things. So the Alaska crew, for example, that services one of the coal breakers, maybe for the past 3 years it's run a certain way. Well, he got a new nugget of information and now he changes it up. So it kind of falls on the layout owner, I think, to keep it fresh, and keep it evolving and changing up a little bit so that you avoid that complacency trap.
you can get different. You can catch different jobs each time. What I shared here is this was 2002 is the date up on the top. Early on in my layout, I was curious how many people I need. So this is the dispatcher took times where the trains would meet. So I took those times after the fact of a session, and on the top is the sidings and the time. So I graphed out each train, and then I graphed it out as the people. So the top person is Tag.
Of course.
He took 20, the Wapaka job. Then he had a little 5-minute break, and then he did 28, 29, had a 15-minute break, 30, 31, and then he did 24, 25. And you had all the poo jobs that day.
All the garbage jobs.
All the garbage straight. But I could then see.
I can't stand to see somebody take a break on that railroad.
Oh.
Crying out loud.
But it was an interesting way to graph because there were some of them where it's I had 7 operators, but you could see they all had lull time where you could necessarily only need 6. But this was something I did early on to help map people and it kind of curious. You can't keep track of everybody during a session to actually see what was going on and how I graph. I don't know. This was just something I thought was interesting, especially for Tom, where Tom is at now, and how many people does it really take to run Tom's layout?
Sure.
This is one thing that I have not. I started to do it, but I have not really done it all the way through in terms of. I mean, I have the sequence. I know the schedule, but I haven't put it into the string line format where. You can kind of get a sense of where things are going to pass and things like that. This is a step that I need to do.
Well, this is really early in the infancy of operating though on your layout though, Luke. The core group hadn't even been formed at this point.
There was a handful.
A handful, but it was.
It's changed over the years.
Yeah, I mean it really was one of those things where it was when you were dispatching. You didn't even have the computer yet set up.
Yeah,
or did you? Or were we still doing the board with the string thing, or whatever the heck that was? A piece of mate. Yeah, it was push
pins. I had to push pins with the train, the front and the back. So I gave permission for that train out to this siding, take the siding.
Oh, yeah.
And then as they would OS, I would kind of bring their hind end up so I could see where everybody was. Yeah, that board, that worked actually for quite a while. So I started doing block detection and that kind of stuff. And
yeah, so William, how are you handling things like on your Hiawatha district? can you have more than one operator on the Hiawatha district at a time, or are you relegated to just one crew in there at because of the space restraints? Or
It's actually, I mean, it's set up in such a way that really you're running more or less this kind of a corridor, and the industries that are down there, the garden job is what it's referred to. So to answer the question, number of jobs, one job, but one of the elevators also has essentially just the elevator only switches out a certain, set of cars. So that's a separate job from the garden job, and they can technically be ran at the same time. Number of guys, 2 guys. You got your engineer and your conductor. So those would be kind of max capacity as far as that's concerned. The overall railroad itself has plans to go larger, but we're just focusing in right now to refine the operations of essentially that branch line or that section of the railroad. I use JMRI as far as the operations are concerned. And when you get into that, I think there's always that conversation, kind of like we already touched on, but when you get into switch lists and you get into how you're going to kind of get stuff to move around on your railroad, it's an art. It's much like the guys with the large railroads need to kind of manage the people. When it's a small railroad, you want to give them enough stuff to do. And I think Tom Klimoski is an expert in regards to navigating and using your time and stretching out the time, whether it's the proto throttle, intricacies of opening doors and gates, little things like that. And then there's a question I see from Tom that says, do you operate under yard limit rules? In technicality, they would be on their own system. So once they leave Southtown Yard, they're kind of free to do whatever they want. They kind of control the plant. So as far as that's concerned, it is a 2-man show, engineer, conductor. And if you want to add a 3rd guy, he could run the elevator job. But that kind of would give you a summary of what I do in the operating world. But it is about extending and kind of opening up the smaller world into what could be kind of the Luke or Tom world, where it's able to fill that couple hours of time. And, I think one of my inspirations, I've mentioned this numerous times, but has been Tom Klimoski sharing his little intricacies that you can add in. Now, Andy just pulled up the switch list. This is what a switch list looks like on my railroad. The top group of cars is obviously the cars that you pick up out of Southtown Yard. The center group of information ends up being the cars that you're going to handle and work with. If it's red, it's a car that you're going to be picking up. If it's green, it's a car that you're setting out. And if it's blue, it's an online move. So, I think I had those backwards. You're spotting the red, you're pulling the green, and you're moving the blue ones. In terms of the overall operating, it's about an hour and a half-ish time for a guy to build his train, switch his cars, and then go put his cars back. Now, Tom did touch on how 2 cars on this switch list that you're actually looking at end up going back into the staging. And the reason for that is, and Tom will answer your question because he actually asked it in an email, but that those 2 cars are moving because I'm using my staging as kind of a turnover of sorts. The weird intricacies that you can see in the very center where it might say LD to MT flour, that's just a load to empty flour. It's taking a car that comes in loaded, it's going to empty it, but it's going to be prepared for flour. And if it says, empty to load, it's going to put maybe corn or wheat in the car. And that's basically in staging. It's telling the system, I want to load that car. So you're tricking JMRI sort of to use staging to stage my trains to come onto the system. And each industry really is just sitting there going, hey, I want an air slide that's empty for flour. That's all that, like Nokomis is a mill and it has a flour car spots. And it just says, I want 4180 air slides in here or a single bay air slide. Send me one. So as Andy kind of zoomed in a little bit, you can read those a little bit better. The bottom red portion is basically the train that comes back after the system has been ran. And that would be your end train. Those LTD to flour, there's the loaded to empty general. That's just a basic hopper. I'm telling JMRI, empty your cars or load the cars with specific commodities. So you can use JMRI and it is complex. It has a lot of things to do. I'm not going to dive into all those little details because I think it gets a little overwhelming. But for anybody that's learning or wants to start using a switch list or use JMRI, I just say start small. Start with a couple industries, start with a few cars, move it across the system and see how it does.
So you mentioned one word that is synonymous with any of these car forwarding computer programs, whether it be JMRI, Ship It from Albion Software. I remember years ago, probably 10 or more years ago, there was one that I was very into. It was called Interchange. It was by a guy by the name of Richard Wakefield. But it was a lot longer than 10 years ago. But when Windows XP died off and went to Vista, he refused to update the program, and it just literally died. I have an old Toshiba laptop with that on there that runs XP that I'm trying to get it to work on. But the word that you use is tricked. I know on Ship It, that's the issue with the computer forwarding software, is like you could have a cover. You can't just go and put covered hopper. Like if I wanted it to be a covered hopper that goes to a grain elevator, I might have to make it a CH1. If it's a cement hopper, you can't. It might be an LO1, which is the AAR code for a covered hopper.
Yep.
LO2 might be a 2-bay covered hopper for cement. LO3 might be for like an air slide. You have to go through in your box cars. You have to do that the same way. So essentially, you end up having to set up your industries with specific types of cars rotating back and forth all the time.
Yep.
So then we cycle back to the very first question asked on the show about the tractors, getting those back. And you can't just put flat car out there, because a flat car, if you just put flat car out there, you might end up with a piggyback flat on going to a team track that is supposed to get lumber on it, or something like that. You have to, quote unquote, like you said, trick the program in order to give the cars and give the rotation of cars and the proper cars going to the proper industries. Now, one of the other issues that I see with, and I'm all for car forwarding programs, but the other issue is there's a 3-to-1 factor regarding car forwarding programs in order to get them to operate properly. And then what I mean by that is typically, and I learned this through that Interchange program, you need 3 cars for every car spot at an industry you have on the layout. You need 3 cars to properly manifest themselves, because you always have one on spot, one en route, and one like someplace else coming to the, you always have, for every one spot, you have 3 cars. Well, you have a 10-car warehouse. That's 30 different cars you could possibly have for that one warehouse.
Whoa.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So now you start accumulating box cars, because you don't have, the car forwarding program doesn't have enough cars to generate your industries all the time, because now you need to start buying more cars. Whereas like with car cards, you can manipulate that, or switch lists, you can manipulate that to however you want. Yeah, Luke, we know you got car cards. So
Mike,
I got a question.
Are these and I'm just going to derail it here real quick, Tom. Are these programs then just really conspiracy type things out there by the manufacturers to get you to buy more cars, or what's the deal here?
No, but I mean, what it is they're these car forwarding programs are trying to give you another realistic aspect from they're trying to bring you to the inside portion of the railroad via the computer. And the issue with it is they are a lot of times very technical to set up, and they can be very frustrating, because you can go through every single step the right way. You hit generate and nothing happens. Now you're trying to figure out, now you beating your head against the ground, or, against the wall, trying to figure out exactly what step did I miss? How come this is, okay, oh, wait a minute. I hit the staging button. Well, I'm not supposed to do that for this train. So because I hit staging, it's not going to auto generate this, that, and the next thing. And when set up properly, even JMRI is kind of fairly technical to get into, but once but not super scary. I mean, it's if you have a little bit of computer savvy, you can manage through it. I'm starting to kind of shy away from them a little bit just because of the fact that it's just a lot more work. You have a lot of work. It's fun. Once you get it all set, you just hit a button and go.
Right.
But you could spend months trying to set up a car forwarding program, or years even trying to set it up to get it to run the way you want. Whereas if all you did was just throw everything down on a switch list or grab a handful of car cards and off you run. You know,
self-correcting. Let's throw that in there.
Well, one of the issues I had with JMRI was loaded. I've got loaded center beams that go in. Now when they come out, they need to be empty. Well, how does JMRI do that? Unless I take the load off. Well, I don't want to take the loads off. I don't want to take the loads out of my open top hoppers. So how do you change those cars out? Well, now you got to switch them out. So you got to run a ghost train to switch those cars out so that now when you're actually picking up the car, it's empty when it says it's empty and it looks right. And why am I pulling a loaded center beam out of a lumber company that should have offloaded it? So,
wouldn't that be the same in a car card? If a car card drops off a loaded center beam, isn't it still loaded?
Yes. But JMRI wants to still pick that car up. So now you got to figure out a way to trick it in the system. In a car card, you have to switch them anyway. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Just real quick, while I got a screen share here. This was my old layout here. This was the one that I was telling you about, where it's a turn job. It tells you what to do. And look at this switch list over here. Basically, it tells you exactly what you need. It's a tank car, the number, and where it's going. It's going to interstate fuel, so it's going pulls are placed, and that's it. It's a real simple switch list. So you don't have to come up with anything complicated here. There's 3 industries, and you're switching just a handful of cars. So you don't have to do these hard, real complicated systems. It can be as simple as you want. You don't have to make it complicated.
And William, to answer your question about the center beam flat cars, the answer to that is no, because of the fact that we literally, I'll never forget this. This is one of the funniest things I've ever had happen to me on a railroad. Is we actually had on our switch list while we're switching the yard a center beam flat that had a notation on it that said loaded or empty.
You choose.
It's like Schrodinger's Schrodinger's flat car.
Yeah, and the problem is the train master called us on the radio and said, "Hey, could you check this car to see if it's loaded or empty?" And it's right in front of the yard, like literally in front of his window. And I said, "Why don't you look out?" I got on the radio back, and I said, "Sure, but why don't you look out the window and check for yourself?" And he turns around, he goes, "Never mind." That was it. And that was the end of it.
Okay.
So
the one thing I like about the car cards is they're self-correcting. If somebody doesn't place the car in the right spot, at least if the car card stays with the car, it should eventually get to where it's supposed to go. That's the one thing that I like about them.
Yeah.
Right.
Where if somebody places something on the computer, you got to try to track that thing down and re-edit the thing in the computer. It can bounce around the layout as long as it wants. Eventually, it should go where it's supposed to go.
Right.
Bottom line, it kind of comes down to personal preference. Whatever you want to do is, and however you feel comfortable running your layout and operating your layout is what it comes down to. And there's really no wrong way to do it. It's just some ways are a little bit more complicated. Some ways are a little easier. Some systems within the same style. Tom and Luke, you guys are good examples. There's nothing wrong with either car card system that you guys have. It's one's a little bit more detailed, one's a lot more simple. I don't really see. I think going to different layouts with different operating styles like that actually makes you a more rounded operator.
Yep.
and actually is a benefit, because if you get pigeonholed and I only want to go there, I don't want to go to Klimoski's place. He uses those stupid switch list things, whatever. I'm not going over there.
Get out.
God, I don't care how many books the guy's written. It doesn't matter. So
that number right now is just one, isn't it? One, Tom?
Yeah, right.
One book.
How many have you written, Mike?
Yeah. How many have I written? I've rewritten a couple.
You talking rule books?
I've rewritten a rule or two.
Added a few new rules to the handbook, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But I mean, it at the end of the day, the whole bottom line is, and it took forever for me to get to this point. We're supposed to be having fun when we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And for like Tom and Luke and myself, it's kind of crazy to think that we do this all day long, every single day, and then I come downstairs for another 3 or 4 hours and I putz around with this stuff on top of that. And that's a level of insanity to a certain degree, but it's enjoyable, it's relaxing, it's something that's fun. And if we start taking it way too serious, then that kind of sucks the fun out of it, and I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to even be around people that do stuff like that. It kind of turns me off to the whole situation,
Sure.
I think one little nuance I would say to that, Mike, is that when I start operating, I want people to take it seriously. I want them to try and emulate the prototype, but we don't have to take ourselves too seriously.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's maybe the minor difference. You're right. We're here to have fun. My job is stressful enough. I don't want stress when I'm operating. Yes. Do I want a mental challenge? Yeah. But and that's why I do these. And look, I'm really gonna blow your mind. I have waybills that have 2 colors on them. So what do you do with that?
Oh, that one goes to Green Bay.
Yellow.
Green and yellow.
No, this is actually one from the ore train that comes out of Grace Mine. What happens is the empty train goes down to the mine in the morning, comes back loaded in the afternoon to Reading Yard. That's the green band, and it sits there until 8 o'clock that night, and then it goes out to Allentown on a Reading to Allentown run. So that's why I did the 2 colors. But so back to the point. Yeah, I want a challenge. I want it to have some thought involved, but I'm not going to be barking at people, hey, you did this wrong, or you didn't read the waybill or whatever. It's here. This is how I have things set up. Here's why we do it. But yeah, I don't want to be the fun vacuum and suck the fun out of the session for everybody.
Well, there was one layout
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, there was one layout that
I was just going to
operated on before we get too far, where the owner graded the operators on how they did on the operating session.
Oh boy,
that lasted for a little while, and then after that got thrown away because you got a report card afterwards, and that took a lot of the fun out of it. And if you want to have people come back, you don't.
I was going to say that's a real good way to thin out the herd. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So this was one of the questions that I wanted to bring up, Tom. Was what are your model railroad, like what is your most memorable model railroad horror story in terms of operations? Like I wanted to ask this question to basically bring the levity to it. That is terrible to have the grading system. So for the panel here, what is the most memorable experience, or I guess horror story that you've had with operations on model railroads? And spare the innocent. We don't have to name names here, but maybe just go into the situation. So does anyone want to take this one?
I'll go quick. I remember not too long ago, prior to about a year before COVID, year and a half, there was an NMRA operating session that was going on, and the guy never gave out his address. He just he gave out his address, but it was the wrong address. It was to somebody else's layout. And so we ended up, like, a handful of us showed up at this other guy's place, and that other guy was actually at the guy's house that we were supposed to be at. So, and there was no phone number to get a hold of this. It was one of those things where eventually we all figured it out where we were supposed to be. But I was just like, yeah, this is never going to happen again. I'm not going to even bother trying to do this ever, and once we got there, it wasn't even that organized. It was, it wasn't a lot of fun, but that was one of the worst ones I can remember. Is all of a sudden
yeah. No, I was just gonna say, have you done anything stupid operating a railroad, or have witnessed anything while operating that just made you, like running two trains into each other, or having like a meet, the old cornfield meet or something like that? Have you had any of those experiences?
I remember a very good friend of Luke and I's, when Luke didn't even have the top deck fully done yet. All of a sudden, I'm in the back room by where Fond du Lac Yard is, where the operator's at, and all of a sudden we hear, and the next thing you know, you hear crashing. That was when Dave put that covered hopper train down off the end of the table on the top deck.
Were you there for that? Yeah.
I was there for that.
I had my Brad's RS-27 on the train, and I'm like, yeah. No issue. It was low trip pin, my fault. Hit a switch, and the siding was curved, and it strung line the whole covered hopper train through the top deck, through the bottom deck to the floor. Yeah, well, engine hit the floor, and I'm like, oh. Oopsie.
Anyone else want to volunteer a horror story?
I'm going to put two very brief ones out there. One was just actually recently. Won't name the two operators. They'll know who they are. But when working on my railroad, the two of them, I watched a car that I knew was not clear of a switch, and they basically sideswiped it and put it on its side. Now, most of my cars are fairly fine scale, but I've been removing some of the air hoses, and an air hose had gotten broken off. So I'm not going to get upset as it is, even if anything did happen. But the air hose got broken off, and I just kind of casually just said, well, I appreciate you removing the air hose. It's not the way I would have gone about it, but I appreciate you removing the air hose. And the other incident that we ran into is at an experienced operating session. I won't mention the other, the operator that had this happen. He's just got the same name as me, and he's older than I am. Some think it's my brother, but it's actually my dad. He T-boned a train that the dispatcher gave him the green light to. Said, you're clear to go into this yard. And I watched as I saw the train going. He's across the railroad because he couldn't get into a pinch point, and he T-boned right into the side of her just at speed. And everybody kind of looked around and says, who is that? And my dad just raises his hand and says, that was me. The dispatcher gave me clearance. So it happens. I mean, I think those are the type of things that, as operators, experiences and obviously incidences, a whole train going to the floor, Luke, I think you might be the leader in the clubhouse.
Oh, no.
Oh, there's a one-upper.
Yeah. I had an incident at a friend's house.
This is awesome.
This is long, just when the tracks was first coming out, and you had, there wasn't radio throttles yet, so I unplugged and went around the end of a peninsula trying to race on a double track main, and I came around the corner, and here's someone's hind end that they were slowing down for the diamonds, and right up the rear, I've shoved the train off, and then it was a double track main. Someone came the other way, and all the cars that were tipped up his main shoved them off the end of the peninsula. The owners on the end just trying to catch covered hoppers as they're moving to the floor.
And the best part about this whole thing is the layout owner was like, "Hey, what was that?" And all you heard was Luke go, "Nothing," because it was kind of in a hidden little alcove of the layout, so it wasn't.
Come around the corner, unplug the radio, throttle, and I'm like, there's a plug here and there's a plug there, and it's like, I'm gonna hit him. It's like
one of those slow motion moments, right?
Yeah, it's
No!
Oopsie.
Well, the two Toms are just smiling nicely. They don't seem to have any horror stories.
Nothing to beat what you guys have.
No.
I mean, I've made plenty of bonehead moves as I was learning. The only horror, outright horror story I ever had was one of those situations where somebody was just yelling and was really just, not being. I was working a yard job, and this was a very large yard, so there was an East End crew and a West End crew. I had run the East End job a bunch of times. I had never run the West End job before. And they are actually, on this layout, they are actually very, very different. The East End job, just in and out, pulling cars off the back of trains, shoving them in tracks. The West End has to make up the outbound locals and all of this. And I had never done it before. And this yard master, from the drop of the green flag, was just right. And I had told him up front, look, I've never done this job. You're going to need to walk me through it a little bit. And just no, from the minute that we started was just on me and yelling. And it was so bad that I was seconds away from just putting the throttle down and leaving in the middle of the session. And I left that session, that I stuck it out, but I left. I was like, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore. Because like I said earlier, I do this to get away from stress. And I was ultimately vindicated when the next month, at a session on another person's layout, the layout owner from the layout where I was brutalized came up to me, pulled me aside, and he had seen what was going on, and he apologized to me. He said, "This is not how I want to run things. This you never should have been treated like this. I'm sorry."
Wow.
And I was like, that, the fact that the owner cared enough about his crew to apologize for what happened, that was like, you know what, I'm good. It's okay. Just don't let me work with that guy again, please.
A simple request, huh?
Yeah. That was really the only really, really bad horror story I've ever had. Everything else was, funny bloopers and things like that.
How would
Really.
you guys get through to a yeller? If a guy like Tom, you ran into somebody that yells at you, then obviously not inviting them back. That's a simple solution. It may be his railroad and you're not going to go back. But guys that are tense, or it gets a little bit heated, I'm pretty laid back. I laugh about things, and some guys, they don't think it's funny. And it's like, well, we're here to have fun. Let's you can joke a little bit, but when it's very serious and tense, how do you guys broach that? And Tom, you kind of touched on that a little bit with the guy that yelled at you. But do you say anything to him, or what do you do?
Well, they never did it like that. You have to do it this way. That wasn't the way they used to do it. You're doing this completely wrong. That's not exactly the way things are supposed to be. Yeah, those guys get under my skin in a way that is just. I'm okay letting them sit in the crew lounge and letting them rot out the session, sitting there doing absolutely nothing. I mean, honestly, if you're going to be like that, let the guys that want to be there and enjoy themselves be there and enjoy themselves. Because to me, you're in your basement. It's not real life. You're emulating something. You're in the basement playing with trains. It's a glorified Christmas tree is what you have.
I
So
didn't get that one there, Mike.
what? What? Well,
it was a Clavinism if I ever heard one.
well, it is. If you stop and think about it, we all, the majority of people started with the train around the Christmas tree.
Oh, okay, I get it now.
7.5 years of my life and countless thousands of dollars and hours of investment, and it's a glorified Christmas tree.
It's a
Thank you.
glorified Christmas tree.
Wow,
That was a
Wow,
slap in the
thanks.
face there, Tom.
Thanks, Mike.
yeah, I mean, so William, I've
It
been in
is.
I've been in those situations, and I'll see that same person who's kind of I guess harsh in a good time. Also, he'll take the 050 out and start moving cars around, and I have a very, I don't know, straight delivery, and I'll just say, I'll just call him out on it. I'll be like, so you were just crying at me for leaving the mainline switch, closed for 2 seconds while I did my work. And I see you over here with your meat hands here, just, greasy meat hands moving cars back and forth. I'm like, don't come over here. Don't come over here and hassle me about a switch when
You
you're
call them
greasing up the
greasy meat
sides
hands?
Well, I mean, they've been hammering like Lay's potato chips in the crew lounge, and they're just sitting here, you're just going back and forth, and they're leaving fingerprints all over the car. So, I just call people out on that, especially if they're the one harsh in the good time, because, they just need to. You can't have people getting the meat crane out and moving cars around and then have them yell at you too. So
Yes.
I think that's the term of the day there,
Yeah.
Mr. Winter Meat Crane. So yeah, that's tough. I got it. I'll share my story here real quick because it's actually a bit of physical comedy. So local club that I was working at, I got asked to be the dispatcher, and so I was dispatching the railroad, and there was a dispute out on the railroad of, well, which train has clearance here. And so I went out, and there's this like geyser gate type thing, and it lifts up and you walk through and you set it back down. So I went and settled the dispute, and the guy that didn't like the ruling from the dispatcher said something under his breath, and I turned around and I was still walking towards the geyser gate, and I didn't open it, and I smacked my head right into it. And the worst part about it was there was a passenger train going over the geyser gate, and I knocked it right onto the floor.
Ouch. Holy cow.
And I never got to dispatch again. We had pad there, and luckily none of the cars or the locomotives were damaged to the point where I couldn't fix them or afford to replace them. So it was.
What about your pride?
Oh my God! It matched the knob on the side of my head. It was bruised. It was bruised. So, yeah. How about anyone else have a horror story to share? No, Tom's been sunshine and rainbows when it's operating for him.
He's been all smiles through this whole thing.
Yeah. So
It's always the quiet ones.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna throw a last prompt out there to the folks in the chat. So if you guys we're getting on about 2.5 hours here, and that's great. And if we want to keep the discussion rolling, I'm all for it. But I do want to give that chance to the folks out in the chat. If you have any questions for our panel here, make sure that you're getting it out there so that we can answer your questions about model railroad operations tonight. But before we land the plane, I guess are there any other things that we want to touch on in terms of what interesting things that you bring to the operations game that may differ from other people's layouts? So Mike talked about it earlier. You got your dice, right? Tom Klimoski, what do you do different that brings a little flavor to your operations on your layout?
Well, William mentioned this. I have a lot of operational details, as I call them. You've got operating derails, operating gates, operating overhead doors, all the little details, and you can do that more easily on a smaller layout than you can on a larger one. And then operating with a proto throttle, that really slows things down and makes you feel like you're operating, because you can't just zip around. You've got to plan when you're going to brake. One of the things I do still have on my proto throttle is I still have the emergency stop on there. When you go to the brake, you can have it where you swing it all the way over and it just applies the brake, or if you go all the way to full brake, it's like an emergency stop. I leave that on there because sometimes guys are coming in a little too hot. Even though the maximum speed's 15 miles an hour, they can come in a little hot and bang the cars. So it's nice to have that on there as a safety, that if I say, when in doubt, slam the brake lever all the way to the right, it'll stop right away. And that way it prevents a lot of apologizing when they knock the details off the cars, like William says, and remove air hoses and all the other little things that I've done.
Unintentional.
But, yes. Yeah. But that's pretty much one of the things. It relates better to a smaller layout. You're able to see the details. You're able to appreciate it more because the trains are operating more slowly. So, those are some of the things on a larger layout. When the train's moving through scenery at 20 or 30 scale miles an hour, you're not really looking at the details. You're just keeping up with the train. So,
yeah. What about you, Luke?
What's the question again now?
Oh my
I
God.
forgot. No, we're just basically what little operating, so aside from the general car cards and CTC, like what type of operational nuances do you have on your layout?
1 second.
That kind of make it stand out. Okay, well he's out there. What about you, Tom Jacobs? What are you looking to add to your layout to add that flair factor to your operations?
Really, just for me, it's the signal system, and having a realistic signal system, and having that will cut down on the radio chatter. I think it'll make things more efficient, and plus the little blinky lights are really cool.
Yeah, right, exactly. Luke, I see that you're back. What do you have here?
One thing I have for operators that don't get here every single time, having a larger pool of operators to keep everybody informed. I did bulletins like they did on the real railroad. So if something has changed on the railroad, because you haven't been here for 3 times, you can read the bulletins and see what is different. I have ones that cover like overall layout, one that covers like each subdivision of the layout, chunks of the layout, and then there's one that does like operation schemes kind of stuff. And that's just like what you have to do in real life for the railroad. You got to go in and you got to check your bulletin, see if there's anything new on the railroad since the last time that you've been there. But that's a good way to keep everybody in touch. I haven't done them for a while. There hasn't been anything real horribly new on the layout to post, but I used to send them out in an email to the mass to everybody, and just so that everybody would have a copy of what's going on the layout. So,
yeah, excellent here. So Maddox 947 has a question here to the panel. I'm currently designing my first layout now. What are some essential elements I should include?
Well, that's a whole other episode.
That's a 3-hour episode on its own.
But what I will say is buy this book and read it cover to cover.
Oh, hold on a second. Let me get you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
John Armstrong's Track Planning for Realistic Operation is what he's holding up.
This is the Bible.
Yep. That I agree.
There are several books like that. Then you have Tom's book, and then you have the one that Lance Minheim has had put out also. That one's very good.
We have a book how to manage a large layout, though. That's the one thing that I noticed. When you get into a large layout like mine, there was no book or reference on how how do you maintain crews? How do out of your pool of 70 people, how do you pick who comes to each session? There's all little things. Crew calling. Who does crew calling for a session? How do you organize that kind of stuff?
Well, maybe you should write one.
Tom's got another book. What is it here, Tom?
Oh, there we go.
That one?
This
OPSIG,
is
OPSIG.
Yep. This is the compendium of model railroad operations that the OPSIG put out a few years ago. I think they probably still have copies available if you go to their website, which is www.opsig.org. This covers everything from, you know, what to model and why operate it, gives you layout design, crew positions, freight operations, car forwarding, and then even down here at the bottom, there's a whole chapter on hosting an operating session, and that gets into some of those questions about how you organize it, how you assign jobs, you know, all of those sort of things. This is let me see. It's $40. Actually, no, I'm sorry. It's $50. It's $40 if you're a member of OPSIG. But it's hardbound. It's over 310 pages, more than 350 photos. It is. If you are at all serious about doing operations on your own layout or learning more about operations, this is a really good investment.
Yep.
And if you are on the smaller side, shameless again, Tom, but building the right size layout, Tom Klimoski. I'm not kidding though. Tom does a nice job. He covers a lot of content, everything all the way down to operations, which we're talking about. I don't know if you know right there. It's operating sessions and paperwork. You want to get into some of that stuff. It's a Kalmbach publication. You can go online, just search even right size layout in Google, and it'll come up, and you'll be able to get yourself a copy. It was nicely done, Tom. You can elaborate a little bit more if you want, but it's a good read.
You've done a great job already. I'll have to send you a check for that.
Hashtag
not sponsored. Not sponsored.
There you go. You got it. You got it.
That's our first one of the night, by the way, Andy.
Yeah. So
Yep.
SN2 Modeler had a nice little comment here. Go operate on as many layouts as possible.
True.
I think that's a good suggestion as well. If you're looking at designing your first layout, and I can say that was helpful for me and a little bit confusing, but truly helpful when so Luke, he took me when I was first getting into the layout building game here. He took me to 3 different layouts, and including his own, to basically show me the different types and styles, to see, well, what do you really like? Because at the end of the day, building the layout, be it the right size or for operations, you got to like it. Because if you don't like it, you're going to rip it out and get frustrated. So I think that was some good advice. And find a buddy that can then show you around a couple different layouts, so you can see what you really like.
You can see what not to do by doing that also.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike.
Well, from
Very good
experience, as well as a lot of those operators will share with you what they would or wouldn't do. Luke, I think one of your biggest ones, and you've mentioned in the past, is don't build a railroad that big.
Don't build a layout this big. No matter how cool you think it is, it's just a maintenance nightmare.
Right.
Yeah, with the family and kids in the railroad career, yeah, it's. I'm not saying it's not cool, but it's a lot of work.
And it's the wrong railroad.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
No, I think you got the railroad right.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about being brought on here as merely a cautionary tale.
I don't even know how to answer that.
No,
I don't either.
I'm like, should I be insulted or am I a genius? I don't know. But I think that to get back before we went on our little tangent there, William, are there any fun little nuances that you add to your layout that kind of set it apart, or you think are going to set it apart operationally?
I think I echo what Tom Klimoski noted, just because I've emulated a lot of the stuff I've done design-wise off of what he's either suggested or has done on his own railroad. The proto throttle, I think, is really what amplified what I've done as far as slowing operations. But Tom actually sent me an ESU file that slowed things down. And I don't remember, there's a gentleman that you said that provided you some of those speed curve or CB information. Tom, who was that offhand?
That was Joe Atkinson from Iowa Interstate. He's modeling the Iowa Interstate. His layout's been out there. Just look up Joe Atkinson. He was gracious enough to share. He was one of the first ones that got the proto throttle and started figuring all the CBs and doing the flattened speed curve and all that other stuff. And then great guy. And then he sent me the information. I plugged it into my locomotives, made a couple little minor tweaks, and off I went. And it was exactly what I needed.
And that slower speed is huge, especially on a smaller railroad. Tom Jacobs might have to be out on the main line, and 15 miles an hour could take a while to get across his railroad, or Luke, you too. But for the smaller side, that to me is what elevated and amplified enjoyment. A two-man crew, hour and a half-ish worth of time. It does slow things down, lets your conductor think or try to get his moves down, and you're not slamming into him right away. I do like you, Tom, set your e-brake. If you're going to throw it all the way to the right so it does stop it if there's a panic moment for a guy to be able to stop his locomotive. But I feel like a lot of things is slow down the pace of operations, and it doesn't have to be every little, detail that you think you need to jam into the railroad. Start kind of working your way through it, and as you progress, you can add to it. But I think slowing down operations is the fun element that I think that really kind of stands out on what I've been doing, and that's been thanks to Tom.
Yeah, very good. What about you, Mike? You doing anything aside from the dice? Doing anything fun?
Well, I've got the proto throttle also, and I've flattened out my my speed curves so that I run right around 10 mile an hour on my and the one difference that I've got compared to the 5 of you is, since I'm an S, being larger, that size lends itself, that 10 miles an hour is actually kind of amplified to a certain degree, because now all the extra details that you've done with your layout actually, and your cars and equipment are right there in your face. So it's not like because I have my layout set at a height where it's just about chin level. So you're looking at the cars almost straight on, and you're actually going to be following the handful of times I've actually run the layout. It's taken me 40 minutes just to switch the 3 industries using the proto throttles at 10 mile an hour. And this is only handling 3 cars, switching one in and one out at each industry. But another thing that I'm using is I'm also using Sargent couplers.
Oh, yeah.
So the Sargent couplers is a whole another element and ball game onto itself, because those operate very much like the real thing. So you've got a little wand that you use with a magnet on it that lifts a little ball bearing on the inside that allows the knuckle to open. And when there's no magnet near that ball bearing and the knuckle closes, that ball bearing drops down and locks that knuckle in place. It's a similar concept to how the real life knuckles work, but that can actually take a lot more time, because now you have to open the knuckles. You have to make sure everything's lined up, because I don't use centering springs. So whatever way, if it's cut off in a curve, the knuckles, then the drawbar stays that way, just like they do in real life. So it's just another element that slows like you said, William, it slows the operation down. And on a small layout like mine, you almost need that. Otherwise, you could be done with everything in 10 minutes. And what fun is that?
Well, that's you, me, Tom Klimoski,
Sure.
and even you, Andy. You go through that fast, and guys I call it slot car operations. Now, Luke and Tom Jacobs, do you guys have a pace that you kind of want to see your operators running to be able to get, obviously you want to get the jobs done, but do you want to see them highballing and running 80 miles an hour?
Nope.
No, not necessarily 80, but I don't want you lollygagging across the railroad.
Well, I'm not welcome is basically.
Me either, Andy. We're already.
It's 40 mile an hour main line. Don't be doing 15 on there.
Well, that's all the faster my throttle goes.
Can you go faster downhill at least? I mean,
Yeah, but Luke, did you set your throttles up so that did you set that, or is that Dan Dyer that did that, where everything is your speedometer is basically your steps on your throttle?
Dan was doing that. I maxed mine out at 60 for speed, but you also got to look at if you do a speed matching light engine versus speed matching under load is completely different unless you start doing the back EMF stuff and into that gets to be a whole new topic. But yeah. I found you do speed matching at 60, you throw a huge train behind it. That's not 60 anymore.
Right. And Tom, same thing for you. Are you planning on doing something where you're gonna like kind of govern your top end so that
I've eventually we've been speed matching contests and things like that. Eventually I want to I do want to limit the top end, because I don't want people barreling across the layout. But I've got, since I've got a Helix, I've got grades all over the place, and I'm running 25 car trains. Simple physics is going to take over and is going to help with some of that.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Wow.
Okay. This was, I mean, this is a record for the second section here. We're coming up on 3 hours. It seems like, I don't know, we've only been talking for about 15 minutes. I mean, this has been a really fantastic show. I just, is there any other topics here from the panel that you guys wanted to discuss before we tie down for the night?
I've got nothing else. The only thing is I got nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
I
Luke
know.
looks surprised.
Yeah.
He knows you too, Mike.
Yeah. Well, I gotta save something for the next time.
I'm a little disappointed.
Oh, that's enough.
That's enough.
I would like to see the same panel together again in a few months when our layouts have all progressed a little further. And Tom, you've gone through gotten through your shakedown session, and Luke, you've gotten back into the operating session scheme, and Andy, your layout and my layout and everybody's layouts are a little bit further progressed. To say, hey, okay, now in the last 4 months or 5 months, what have we learned operationally that we didn't know from the last time we talked? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily have to rehash all the same things here, but I wouldn't mind seeing the same panel back together talking operations again.
I wrote it down on so maybe I'll schedule something for this basically like a check-in, let's say.
A shakedown
where we're at,
session.
and shakedown.
And for anybody that wants to know, I know where Tom Jacobs lives, so we can all caravan to his house. He's more than gracious to have us all run the layout.
The look on his face doesn't say that.
Oh, wait. Was I not supposed to say that out loud?
No. And actually, Mike, now, Mike came here a few years ago, and, he put in a full day's worth of sweat equity, doing some wiring and building some bench work. And he, apart from us feeding him really well, as I said on the last discussion, Mike did get his reward at the end of the day when we flicked the power on, and he got to run a train around the layout. So
that was fun. That was really a lot of fun, Tom. Honestly, your layout is going to be. I can't wait to see how these operating sessions go. It's going to be a blast.
It's actually a lot more fun now from when you were here, because we've gotten so much more connected and in place and everything. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this session on the 20th. I've got a bunch of experienced operators coming in, some that I know well, some that I've never operated with before. So I'm going to get a good. I'm hoping I'm going to get a good range of perspectives and insights, and I think that's what I'm really going to need to really refine this. And I'll
Tom,
let you know if anybody complains about the waybills.
And Tom, just briefly touch on, he has a Facebook page if anybody hasn't seen or not watched the previous podcast, but following along at the pace that you've been moving, it's been impressive to see. You do have signals on your system. You did say you're using JMRI. From a capacity standpoint, how much of the signal system is kind of up and running and functioning for the operators to basically be working off the signals?
I have one interlocking fully programmed, and I have another one that's about, I want to say about 2/3 programmed. I need to do some more logic. There's a couple other interlockings that I don't even have all the signals for. So we're going to have to do a bit of Mother May I in those spots, but
Okay.
there are a few interlockings where we can actually test the signaling and make sure it works. I mean, in between the interlockings, I have automatic block signaling set up, and that's in place and working.
Okay. So
So
the ABS works, the CTC you're just still kind of working through.
correct.
Okay. It's cool. Kudos to you for tackling signals. I'm working on my dad's doing that. The logic and the programming behind it. It's one of the more mind-bending elements to get all that stuff talking. So it's neat to see. If you have any interest in signals, check out the stuff Tom's doing, because it's definitely cool.
I used to have dark brown hair before I started.
Very good, fellas. So I just want to thank the crew here on the panel tonight. So William, Tom, Luke, thank you for joining us this evening. It was a great discussion. For the folks listening on the audio replay, and for the folks tuned into the live stream here, I am going to put the contact info for the where you can reach our panelists on social media. I'll put their stuff down in the show notes or in the description below the stream tonight. I'll get that added back in there. And again, we'll put copies of the books out there in the descriptions as well. Hashtag not sponsored, of course. This is all on your own. So, Mike, anything else before we tie up for tonight?
No, I think we've covered a lot. So I'm good.
I think we have too. I want to thank the section crew for hanging in there tonight on the chat. We had at the low point here, just coming in the end, 25 members out there. High point was up in the 50s. So we truly appreciate the support, all the good comments that you guys provided tonight. Really made this a real fun session. So I guess for Mike and myself here at the second section, I just want to thank everyone and have a good night. Bye now.